Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. I've always been a city person. The constant hum of traffic, the smell of coffee shops on every corner, and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard as I worked on design projects. That was my life in New Orleans. But in the summer of 2015, at the age of 28, I found myself craving something different. Something that would shake up my routine and give me a break from the endless cycle of client meetings and deadlines. That's when my buddy Travis came to me with an idea. "Rich," he said, leaning back in his chair at our favorite coffee shop, "how about we volunteer at a summer camp? It's in the Ozarks, right in the heart of nature. No computers, no clients, just fresh air and annoying kids." He grinned, showing he was only half serious about the annoying part. I raised an eyebrow. "A summer camp? Travis, I barely know how to talk to kids, let alone entertain them for a week." He waved off my concern. "Don't worry about it. I did it last year and it was a blast. Plus, Maya's coming too. She's great with kids, being a teacher and all. Between the three of us, we'll manage just fine." I mulled it over, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. The idea of spending a week in nature, away from the constant notifications and emails, was starting to grow on me. "Where exactly is this camp?" I asked, my interest piqued. "It's in Arkansas near the Buffalo National River. Beautiful area, lots of hiking trails, a big lake for swimming. Come on, Rich, when's the last time you did something spontaneous?" He had me there. My life had fallen into a predictable pattern, and the thought of breaking out of it was enticing. "All right," I said finally, "I'm in. But if I end up covered in poison ivy or chased by a bear, I'm blaming you." Travis laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Trust me, it'll be great. We leave next week. I'll send you the details." As I walked home that evening, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The week flew by in a flurry of preparation. I tied up loose ends with my clients, packed a bag full of clothes I hoped would be suitable for outdoor activities, and even bought a new pair of hiking boots. Before I knew it, I was squeezed into the back of Travis's beat-up Jeep, with Maya in the passenger seat and Travis behind the wheel, heading north towards Arkansas. The drive took us through Louisiana and into Arkansas, the landscape gradually changing from flat bayous to rolling hills, and finally to the rugged beauty of the Ozarks. As we wound our way through the mountains, I found myself captivated by the lush green forests and the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves. "Almost there," Travis announced as we turned onto a narrow gravel road. "Camp Whispering Pines, here we come." The road twisted and turned through the dense forest for what felt like miles before finally opening up to reveal a clearing. And there it was, Camp Whispering Pines, looking like something straight out of a postcard. A large wooden sign welcomed us, the paint slightly faded but still cheerful. Beyond it, I could see a cluster of log cabins surrounding a central area with picnic tables and a large fire pit. To the left, a pristine lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, a small dock jutting out into the water. As we pulled up to the main office, a man emerged from the building. He was older, probably in his late 60s, with a kind face etched with laugh lines and a full head of silver hair. He walked with a slight limp, but his handshake was firm as he greeted us. "Welcome to Camp Whispering Pines," he said warmly. "I'm Robert Caldwell, the camp director. You must be our new volunteers." We introduced ourselves, and Mr. Caldwell gave us a quick tour of the camp. The main area consisted of several cabins for the campers, a larger cabin for the staff, a mess hall, and various activity areas. The whole place had a rustic, well-loved feel to it. "We're so glad to have you here," Mr. Caldwell said as we finished the tour. "The campers will be arriving tomorrow morning, so you have the evening to settle in and get familiar with the place. Dinner's at 6 in the mess hall. Any questions?" We shook our heads, still taking in our surroundings. As Mr. Caldwell walked away, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes darted towards the tree line, a fleeting expression of, was it worry? But before I could dwell on it, Travis was already dragging me towards our cabin, excited to start our adventure. That evening, as we sat around the campfire with the other staff members, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The crackling of the fire, the chirping of crickets, and the soft lapping of the lake against the shore created a soothing symphony. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or client revisions. I was simply present, enjoying the company and the beauty of nature around us. Little did I know that this tranquility was merely the calm before the storm. In the days to come, the peaceful facade of Camp Whispering Pines would be shattered, revealing a darkness that had been lurking just beneath the surface all along. As I drifted off to sleep that night in my narrow bunk bed, the soft whisper of wind through the pines outside our cabin window, I had no idea of the horrors that awaited us. No idea that in just a few short days, this idyllic summer camp would become the setting for a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sun peeking through the curtains and rousing me from a deep sleep. For a moment I was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings throwing me off. Then I remembered. I was at Camp Whispering Pines, about to start a week of volunteering. I climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Travis, who was still snoring softly in the bunk above me. Outside, I could hear the bustling sounds of the camp coming to life. The clanging of pots and pans from the mess hall, the slam of car doors as the other counselors arrived, and the distant call of birds in the forest. After a quick shower in the communal bathhouse, an experience I was not quite prepared for, I made my way to the mess hall. The smell of bacon and coffee drew me in, my stomach growling in anticipation. Maya was already there, sitting at one of the long wooden tables with a mug of coffee in her hands. She smiled as I approached, pushing a plate of bacon and eggs towards me. "Morning, Rich," she said. "Sleep well?" I nodded, taking a grateful sip of the coffee she'd poured for me. "Like a log. It's so quiet out here compared to the city." "I know, right?" Maya's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can't wait for the kids to arrive. It's going to be so much fun." I smiled at her enthusiasm, though internally I was still nervous about interacting with the campers. I'd never been particularly good with kids, always unsure of how to talk to them or what activities they'd enjoy. As if reading my thoughts, Maya reached out and patted my hand. "Don't worry, Rich. You'll do great. Just be yourself and the kids will love you." Before I could respond, the mess hall door burst open and Mr. Caldwell strode in, his limp barely noticeable in his excitement. "Good morning, everyone," he called out, his voice booming through the room. "The buses will be arriving in about an hour. Let's make sure everything's ready for our campers." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. We helped set up welcome signs, prepared name tags, and did one final sweep of the cabins to ensure everything was in order. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice how Mr. Caldwell seemed to be everywhere at once, checking and double-checking every detail. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found my own excitement growing. Finally, the distant rumble of buses could be heard. We all gathered near the camp entrance, watching as 3 yellow school buses wound their way up the gravel road. As they pulled to a stop, the doors opened and a flood of children poured out, their excited chatter filling the air. For the next few hours, it was controlled chaos as we helped the kids find their cabins, get settled in, and start to explore the camp. I was assigned to a group of 12-year-old boys, and to my surprise, I found myself enjoying their energy and curiosity. One boy in particular caught my attention. His name was Ethan, a quiet kid with glasses who seemed more interested in the plants and insects around the camp than in roughhousing with the other boys. I made a mental note to keep an eye on him, to make sure he didn't feel left out. As the day progressed, we moved through a series of activities designed to help the kids get to know each other and become familiar with the camp. We played name games, had a scavenger hunt around the grounds, and ended the day with a campfire and s'mores. Sitting around the fire that night, watching the flames dance and listening to the kids laugh and chat, I felt a sense of contentment. Maybe Travis had been right. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. But as I glanced around the circle, my eyes caught Mr. Caldwell's. He was standing at the edge of the firelight, his face half in shadow. And in that moment I saw something in his expression that sent a chill down my spine. It was a look of fear, quickly masked as he noticed my gaze. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling. I was probably just tired from the long day, seeing things that weren't there. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right at Camp Whispering Pines. The next few days fell into a routine. We'd wake up early, have breakfast in the mess hall, and then lead the kids through various activities: hiking, swimming, arts and crafts, sports. The days were long and tiring, but there was something rewarding about seeing the kids' faces light up as they learned new skills or conquered their fears. Ethan, the quiet boy from my group, continued to intrigue me. While the other boys were always eager for the more active pursuits, Ethan seemed happiest during our nature walks, pointing out different plants and insects with a knowledge that surprised me. On the fourth day of camp, I decided to talk to him during our afternoon free time. I found him sitting by the lake, sketching in a notebook. "Hey, Ethan," I said, sitting down next to him. "What are you drawing?" He looked up, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Oh, hi, Mr. Richard. I'm drawing the dragonflies. Did you know there are over 5,000 species of dragonflies in the world?" I smiled, impressed by his knowledge. "I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. You seem to know a lot about nature." Ethan nodded, his eyes lighting up. "I love learning about animals and plants. My dad's a biologist, so he teaches me a lot." We chatted for a while about the different plants and animals around the camp. As we talked, I noticed Ethan becoming more animated, his usual shyness fading away. "Mr. Richard," he said suddenly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, curious about his sudden change in demeanor. Ethan glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Do you know about the disappearances?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Disappearances? What do you mean?" "I overheard some of the older kids talking," Ethan said, his voice still low. "They said that a long time ago, some kids went missing from this camp. Is that true?" For a moment I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't heard anything about disappearances, and I was sure it was just a camp ghost story. But the seriousness in Ethan's eyes made me pause. "I'm not sure, Ethan," I said finally. "Sometimes people like to make up scary stories about places like this. But I can assure you, you're safe here. We're all looking out for you kids." Ethan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Before I could say anything else, the sound of the dinner bell echoed across the camp. "Come on," I said, standing up and offering him a hand. "Let's go get some food. I hear it's pizza night." As we walked back to the mess hall, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Ethan's question had stirred up. It was probably nothing, just a camp legend. But I made a mental note to ask Travis about it later. That night, as we gathered around the campfire for our nightly storytelling session, I noticed Mr. Caldwell seemed more on edge than usual. His eyes kept darting to the tree line, and he flinched at every unexpected sound from the forest. When it was his turn to tell a story, he cleared his throat nervously. "How about I tell you all about the history of Camp Whispering Pines?" he suggested, his voice a little shaky. The kids groaned, clearly hoping for something scarier, but Mr. Caldwell pressed on. He talked about how the camp had been founded in the 1950s, how it had weathered storms and droughts, how generations of children had passed through its gates. But as he spoke, I couldn't help but notice what he wasn't saying. There was no mention of any troubles, any dark periods in the camp's history. It felt like he was skirting around something, carefully avoiding certain topics. After the kids had been sent to bed, I pulled Travis and Maya aside. "Hey, have either of you heard anything about disappearances at this camp?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Travis's eyebrows shot up. "Disappearances? No, nothing like that. Why do you ask?" I explained my conversation with Ethan. Maya frowned, her forehead creasing with concern. "That's odd," she said. "I haven't heard anything either, but I don't know. Something feels off about this place sometimes. Have you noticed how Mr. Caldwell gets all jumpy when it gets dark?" Travis shrugged. "He's an old guy in the woods. Probably just gets spooked easily. Look, I'm sure it's nothing. Just some camp legend that gets passed around to scare the newbies." I nodded, wanting to believe him. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important, something dangerous. Little did I know our peaceful week at Camp Whispering Pines was about to take a dark turn, plunging us into a nightmare none of us could have imagined. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, a stark contrast to the sunny days we'd had so far. A chill hung in the air, and a light mist clung to the ground, giving the camp an eerie, otherworldly feel. As I made my way to the mess hall for breakfast, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. The camp felt different somehow, the usual morning chatter of birds conspicuously absent. Inside the mess hall, the atmosphere was subdued. The kids, usually boisterous and full of energy in the mornings, were quieter than usual, huddled in small groups and speaking in hushed tones. I spotted Ethan sitting alone at one of the tables, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. I grabbed my own breakfast and sat down across from him. "Morning, Ethan," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Everything okay?" He looked up at me, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Mr. Richard," he whispered, "I had a bad dream last night." I leaned in, concerned. "What kind of dream?" Ethan glanced around nervously before continuing. "I dreamed about the missing kids. They were in the woods calling for help, but no one could hear them. And there was something else out there, something bad." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a reassuring smile. "It was just a dream, Ethan. Probably because of our conversation yesterday. Try not to worry about it, okay?" He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Before I could say anything else, Mr. Caldwell's voice boomed through the mess hall. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Before I could say anything else, Mr. Caldwell's voice boomed through the mess hall. "Attention, everyone. Due to the weather, we're going to have to change our plans for today. Instead of the hike, we'll be doing indoor activities this morning. Counselors, please see me after breakfast for details." A collective groan went up from the kids, but I felt a sense of relief. Something about the idea of going into the misty woods today made me uneasy. After breakfast, I joined the other counselors gathered around Mr. Caldwell. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well. His hands shook slightly as he handed out the day's revised schedule. "Everything all right, Mr. Caldwell?" I asked quietly as the others dispersed. He started, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, yes, just didn't sleep well. The wind, you know." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Better get to your group, Richard. Lots to do today." I nodded and turned away, but not before I saw his smile falter, replaced by a look of, was it fear? Guilt? I couldn't quite place it, but it made my stomach churn. The morning passed slowly. We kept the kids occupied with board games, arts and crafts, and impromptu talent shows, but there was an underlying tension that wouldn't dissipate. Every now and then, I'd catch one of the kids staring out the window at the misty woods, a strange expression on their face. By lunchtime, the weather had cleared somewhat, and Mr. Caldwell announced that we could resume outdoor activities for the afternoon. The kids cheered, eager to get outside after being cooped up all morning. We decided to take the kids down to the lake for some swimming and canoeing. As we made our way down the path, I found myself walking next to Ethan. "Feeling better?" I asked him. He shrugged. "I guess." "Mr. Richard, do you ever feel like you're being watched?" I was about to respond when a scream cut through the air. It came from up ahead where the path opened up to the lake shore. I broke into a run, my heart pounding. I burst through the trees to find Maya standing at the edge of the water, her face pale. The other kids were clustered around her, their eyes wide with fear. "Maya, what's wrong?" I panted, skidding to a stop beside her. She pointed wordlessly at something floating in the water. At first I couldn't make out what it was. Then the wind shifted, turning it slightly, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, bobbing gently in the waves. Is that—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Maya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Lily's, the girl from cabin 3. I turned to the group of kids behind us. "Has anyone seen Lily today?" They shook their heads, fear evident in their eyes. I did a quick head count and felt my stomach drop. We were one kid short. "Okay, everyone stay calm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maya, take the kids back to the main camp and alert Mr. Caldwell. I'm going to look around here." As Maya ushered the frightened children back up the path, I waded into the water to retrieve the shoe. It was a small sneaker, decorated with cartoon characters. Definitely Lily's. I searched the shoreline, calling Lily's name, but there was no response. The mist had started to roll in again, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. As I peered into the gloom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching me. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. But it was just Travis, looking as scared as I felt. "Maya told me what happened," he said, his voice low. "Any sign of her?" I shook my head. "Nothing but the shoe. Travis, what the hell is going on here?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around nervously. "I don't know, man, but I've been doing some digging. You remember what Ethan said about the disappearances? It's true. Back in the 70s, 3 kids went missing from this camp. They were never found." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I only just found out. I overheard some of the older staff talking about it. They tried to keep it quiet, said it was bad for business. But get this, the camp closed down for a few years after it happened, and guess who reopened it?" "Mr. Caldwell," I breathed, the pieces starting to fall into place. Travis nodded grimly. "He was a counselor here when the kids disappeared, took over the place a few years later." I was about to respond when a shout came from the direction of the camp. We exchanged a look and took off running. We arrived back at the main camp to find chaos. Kids were crying, counselors were running back and forth, and in the middle of it all stood Mr. Caldwell, looking older and more haggard than ever. "What's going on?" I demanded as we approached. Mr. Caldwell turned to us, his face ashen. "It's not just Lily," he said, his voice barely audible. 2 more kids are missing, Ethan and Jake." My blood ran cold at the mention of Ethan's name. I thought of our conversation at breakfast, his talk of bad dreams and feeling watched. Had he known something was going to happen? "We need to call the police," I said firmly. Mr. Caldwell shook his head. "No signal up here. The landline's dead too. I've sent 2 of the staff to drive into town for help, but it'll take them at least an hour to get there." "Then we need to organize a search party," Travis said. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." Mr. Caldwell nodded wearily. Yes, you're right. But we need to be careful. The woods, they're not safe." I caught Travis's eye, seeing my own fear and suspicion reflected there. What did Mr. Caldwell know that he wasn't telling us? As we began to organize the search parties, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn into something dark and ancient. The mist continued to thicken around us, and in the distance I could have sworn I heard the sound of childish laughter, quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. Whatever was happening at Camp Whispering Pines, I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. As I grabbed a flashlight and prepared to head into the woods, I silently prayed that we weren't already too late. The search parties were organized quickly, with a mix of counselors and older campers paired up to cover more ground. Mr. Caldwell insisted that no one go alone, his eyes wild with a fear that seemed to go beyond just concern for the missing children. I was paired with Travis, which gave me some comfort. As we set off into the woods, the mist swirling around our ankles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. "What do you think is really going on here?" I whispered to Travis as we picked our way through the underbrush. He shook his head, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "I don't know, man, but something's not right. The way Caldwell's acting, these disappearances, it's like history repeating itself." We called out for the missing kids as we walked, our voices echoing strangely in the mist-shrouded forest. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. After what felt like hours of fruitless searching, we heard a shout in the distance. We broke into a run, pushing through the undergrowth towards the sound. We burst into a small clearing to find Maya and another counselor, Jenny, standing at the edge of what looked like an old well. Maya's face was pale, her hands shaking as she pointed at something on the ground. As we drew closer, I saw what had upset her. There, half hidden in the leaves, was a small bracelet. I recognized it immediately. It was Lily's, a friendship bracelet she'd made during arts and crafts. "We found this," Maya said, her voice trembling. "And then we heard... "What?" I pressed. "What did you hear?" Jenny spoke up, her eyes wide with fear. It sounded like children laughing, but it was wrong somehow, distorted, and it seemed to be coming from down there. She pointed at the well. I approached the well cautiously, shining my flashlight down into its depths. The beam disappeared into blackness, not even reaching the bottom. As I leaned in closer, I felt a cold draft of air brush against my face, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet smell. Suddenly a sound drifted up from the darkness. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it, but as I strained my ears it became clearer. It was singing. A child's voice, singing a nursery rhyme in a slow, eerie cadence. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. The voice faded away, replaced by a sound that made my blood run cold, the muffled sound of children crying. I stumbled back from the well, my heart pounding. "We need to get down there," I said, my voice hoarse. Travis grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy? We don't know what's down there." "The kids are down there," I shouted, shaking him off. "We can't just leave them." Before anyone could stop me, I was shrugging off my jacket and looking for a way to climb down. The old rope that might have once held a bucket was long gone, but the stones of the well provided enough handholds. "Rich, don't," Maya pleaded, but I was already lowering myself into the darkness. The climb down was terrifying. The stones were slick with moss, and more than once I nearly lost my grip. The beam of the flashlight I'd clenched between my teeth barely penetrated the oppressive darkness. After what felt like an eternity, my feet touched solid ground. I found myself in a small, damp chamber. The sickly sweet smell was stronger here, almost overpowering. As I swung my flashlight around, I gasped. The walls were covered in crude drawings, stick figures and strange symbols etched into the stone, and there, huddled in the corner, were 3 small figures. "Lily, Ethan, Jake," I called softly, approaching them slowly. They looked up at me, their eyes wide and unfocused. They seemed unharmed, but there was something off about them. They didn't speak, didn't cry out in relief. They just stared. I was about to reach for them when a voice spoke from the shadows behind me. I was wondering when someone would find this place. I whirled around, my heart nearly stopping. There, emerging from a dark passage I hadn't noticed before, was Mr. Caldwell. But he looked different, younger somehow, his limp gone, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. What is this place?" I stammered, trying to position myself between him and the children. "What have you done?" He smiled, and in that moment he didn't look human at all. "This place has been here long before the camp, long before any of us. It hungers, you see, and I feed it." As he spoke, the air around him seemed to shimmer and distort. I blinked, and for a moment I saw something else standing there, something ancient and terrible, with too many limbs and eyes that burned like coals. I screamed then, a primal sound of terror that echoed off the stone walls. I scooped up the nearest child, Ethan, I think, and made a dash for the well shaft. Behind me, I heard Mr. Caldwell, or whatever he truly was, laugh. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. What happened next is a blur in my memory. Somehow I managed to climb out of that well, Ethan clinging to my back. Hands reached down to help us, Travis, Maya, and others who had heard my scream and come running. We got the other children out too, though they remained in that strange, unresponsive state. As we stumbled back towards the camp, I babbled out what I'd seen. I don't know if they believed me. I'm not sure I believed it myself. The authorities arrived soon after, alerted by the staff members who had gone for help. The woods were searched, but no trace of Mr. Caldwell was ever found. The well, when investigated, showed no sign of the chamber I'd described or the drawings on the walls. Camp Whispering Pines was shut down permanently. The missing children eventually recovered, though they never spoke about what had happened to them. As for me, I went back to my life in New Orleans, but I was forever changed. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the night, my heart pounding, convinced I can hear the sound of childish laughter drifting on the wind. And in my darkest moments I wonder, was what I saw in that well real? Or was it just a manifestation of some deeper, more primordial fear? I don't suppose I'll ever know for sure. But one thing I do know, I'll never look at a summer camp the same way again. And if I ever hear whispers in the pines, I'll run in the other direction as fast as I can. My name is Robert Johnson, and I'm 66 years old. This happened to me back in the summer of 2005. I was 23, fresh out of college and in desperate need of a break from the relentless grind of academia. I had this idea that working at a summer camp would be the perfect way to unwind, so I signed up to be a counselor at Camp Willow Creek in Montana. It sounded idyllic: rolling hills, crystal clear lakes, and no cell service to remind me of the thesis still waiting on my laptop. Camp Willow Creek was one of those old-school places where kids learned how to fish, build campfires, and make friends outside of a screen. It had been around since the 60s and had the charm to match, with creaky wooden cabins and a main lodge that always smelled like pine and campfire smoke. There were about 15 of us counselors, a mix of college kids like me and a few high schoolers. I remember the first day vividly. The sun was high, and I was joking around with Todd, another counselor who became my fast friend. Todd was a stocky guy with a permanent tan and a laugh that could scare away a bear. We were unpacking supplies in the main lodge when we met our head counselor, Eleanor. She was in her early 40s with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that told you she'd seen it all. Eleanor gave us the rundown of our duties and warned us about the wildlife. We all laughed, thinking she meant raccoons or the occasional bear. Little did we know, the true dangers lurking in those woods were far more sinister than any wild animal. The first few weeks were uneventful. We led hikes, organized swimming competitions, and told ghost stories around the campfire. The kids loved it, and so did we. There was something pure about the place, a kind of untouched beauty that made you forget the outside world existed. But then things started to change. It was mid-July when I first noticed something odd. We were preparing for a big overnight camping trip up by Eagle Point, a popular spot about a mile hike from the main camp. That afternoon I saw Eleanor talking to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a scraggly beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in months. He seemed agitated, waving his hands and pointing towards the woods. Eleanor's face was set in a hard line, her lips moving rapidly as she spoke to him. I walked over to Todd, who was organizing the tents, and nodded towards the scene. "You know who that is?" Todd looked up, squinting against the sun. "No idea, but he doesn't look too happy, does he?" We watched as the man finally turned and stomped away, disappearing into the trees. Eleanor stood there for a moment, rubbing her temples before heading back towards us. When she reached us, her expression had softened, but I could still see the tension around her eyes. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a local," she replied, her voice clipped. "Nothing to worry about. Now, are you guys ready for tonight?" I wanted to press further, but Eleanor's tone made it clear the conversation was over. That night we hiked up to Eagle Point with the kids, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned a brilliant shade of orange, casting long shadows across the clearing. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories, the usual camp fare. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the image of that man and the way he had looked at Eleanor. Around midnight, the kids were finally asleep in their tents, and the other counselors and I sat around the dying fire. Todd was poking at the embers with a stick, his face thoughtful. "You think there's more to that guy than Eleanor's letting on?" he asked, echoing my thoughts. I shrugged. "Probably just some crazy local. You know how it is out here." Todd nodded, but neither of us looked convinced. We decided to keep watch, taking turns to ensure everything stayed quiet. My shift was the last, from 3 to 5 a.m. The woods were eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I sat by the fire, staring into the darkness, my mind playing tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig had me on edge. Just as the sky began to lighten, I heard it, a faint sound like footsteps. I stood up, straining to see through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, I saw a figure. It was the man from earlier, standing perfectly still, watching us. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly reached for my flashlight, keeping my eyes on him. But when I flicked it on, he was gone, just vanished into the trees. I didn't mention the encounter to Eleanor the next day, partly because I didn't want to alarm the kids, and partly because I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. The rest of the week passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I went into the woods, I felt eyes on me. Then, about a week later, one of the kids, a quiet boy named Jeremy, went missing. We were supposed to meet at the main lodge after free time, but Jeremy never showed up. We searched the camp, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in quickly. Eleanor called the local authorities, and we organized search parties to comb through the woods. It was a late afternoon when we found him, or rather what was left of him. His body was lying in a small clearing about half a mile from the camp, hidden under a layer of leaves and branches. The scene was gruesome, something out of a nightmare. His clothes were torn, and there were deep gashes all over his body. It looked like he had been attacked by an animal, but there was something too precise, too deliberate about the wounds. We were all in shock. The camp was immediately shut down, the kids sent home while the police investigated. They interviewed all of us, but none of us had seen anything unusual, except for me. I told them about the man I had seen, but without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to stall. I went back home, but the memories of that summer haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about Jeremy and the look of terror frozen on his face. I started digging into the camp's history, trying to find any clue that might explain what had happened. What I found was chilling. There had been other incidents at Camp Willow Creek, dating back decades. Campers and counselors going missing, bodies found mutilated in the woods. It wasn't common knowledge, buried in old newspaper archives and forgotten records. The authorities had always chalked it up to animal attacks or accidents, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. I reached out to Eleanor, hoping she might have some answers. She was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually she agreed to meet me. We met at a small cafe in town, and I could see the toll the past weeks had taken on her. She looked exhausted, her eyes hollow and haunted. "Why didn't you tell us about the other incidents?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples, "Because I didn't want to believe it was happening again. We thought we had put a stop to it years ago." I leaned in, my heart pounding. She hesitated, then began to tell me a story that made my blood run cold. Back in the late 80s, there had been a series of similar attacks at the camp. They had eventually traced it back to a local man, a recluse who lived in the woods. He had been killing campers, believing they were trespassing on his land. The police had arrested him, but he had escaped custody and vanished. They assumed he had died in the woods, but the attacks had stopped, so they closed the case. "But what if he didn't die?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know, but it seems like someone or something is following in his footsteps." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I had seen, could he be the same one, or perhaps a relative? The thought was terrifying, but it made too much sense. The precision of the attacks, the deliberate nature of the wounds, it all pointed to a human hand. I decided I couldn't let this go. I had to find out the truth, not just for Jeremy, but for all the victims over the years. I convinced Todd to come back with me to Camp Willow Creek. We planned to do some investigating on our own, hoping to find something the police had missed. We arrived at the camp just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the deserted grounds. The place felt different now, its once welcoming atmosphere replaced by an oppressive silence. We made our way to the main lodge, setting up our gear and preparing for a long night. As darkness fell, we began our search, starting with the area where Jeremy's body had been found. We moved slowly, methodically, our flashlights cutting through the thick underbrush. Hours passed with nothing to show for our efforts, and I could feel the frustration building. Then, just as we were about to call it a night, we heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes. We froze, our flashlights converging on the source of the sound. Slowly we approached, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we drew closer, we saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was him, the same man I had seen weeks ago. His clothes were even more tattered, his beard wilder, his eyes filled with a manic intensity. He stood there watching us, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just kept smiling as he took a step towards us. That's when I saw the knife in his hand, glinting in the moonlight. Panic surged through me, but I knew we couldn't run. We had to confront him, end this once and for all. Todd and I spread out, trying to flank him. He lunged at me, the knife flashing through the air. I dodged, feeling the blade graze my arm. Todd tackled him from behind, and the three of us went down in a tangle of limbs. The man was strong, stronger than he looked, and he fought with a feral intensity. In the struggle, I managed to grab a rock, bringing it down on his head. He grunted, momentarily stunned, and we managed to wrestle the knife away. Todd pinned him to the ground as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The police arrived within minutes, taking the man into custody. He was barely conscious, his head bleeding from the blow. As they hauled him away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with lingering dread. We had stopped him, but at what cost? The aftermath was a blur of police interviews and media attention. They confirmed that the man was indeed the same one who had escaped custody years ago, living in the woods and continuing his gruesome work. The camp was shut down indefinitely, and the story became a local legend, a cautionary tale for anyone who ventured too far into the wilderness. I went back to my life, but the events of that summer never left me. I still think about Jeremy and the other victims and the horrors they must have faced. It's a scar that will never fully heal, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most idyllic places. Years later, I still get together with Todd sometimes, and we talk about that summer. We laugh about the good times, the jokes, and the friendships, but there's always a shadow over those memories, a piece of our past that refuses to fade. And every time I hear a rustle in the bushes or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I can't help but feel a chill, wondering if there are still secrets hidden in the woods, waiting to be uncovered. But the story doesn't end there. The events at Camp Willow Creek set in motion a series of investigations that would uncover a dark history spanning decades. As news of the killer's capture spread, more people came forward with their own stories of strange encounters and unexplained disappearances in the area. Local historian Maria Sanchez began compiling these accounts, piecing together a troubling pattern that stretched back to the camp's founding in the 1960s. She discovered that the land where Camp Willow Creek stood had once belonged to a reclusive family with a reputation for violence and strange beliefs. The family had been forced off their land when the camp was established, but rumors persisted that some of them had remained in the surrounding woods, nurturing a deep-seated hatred for the invaders who had taken their home. As I delved deeper into Maria's research, I found myself drawn back into the mystery. Todd and I spent countless hours poring over old records, interviewing locals, and exploring the dense forests around the camp. We learned that the man we had caught, whose name we now knew was Frank Holbrook, was just one piece of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. Frank, it turned out, was the grandson of the original landowners. He had grown up on stories of his family's lost heritage and had taken it upon himself to reclaim what he saw as rightfully his. But he wasn't alone in his crusade. We uncovered evidence of a small group of individuals, all descendants of the original family, who had been living off the grid in the wilderness for years. They had created their own twisted society, passing down their hatred and violent tendencies from generation to generation. This revelation shed new light on the sporadic nature of the attacks over the years. It wasn't just one man, but a group working together, striking when the opportunity arose and then retreating back into the wild. The police launched a massive operation to locate and apprehend the remaining members of this group. For weeks, the forests around Camp Willow Creek were combed by search parties and tracking dogs. Slowly, they began to find evidence of long-term habitation, makeshift shelters, crude tools, and eventually the people themselves. The arrests made national headlines. The story of a hidden clan of killers living in the Montana wilderness captured the public imagination. There were talks of books and movies, but for those of us who had lived through it, the reality was far from entertaining. As the full extent of their crimes came to light, the horror of what had happened at Camp Willow Creek only deepened. The group had been responsible for dozens of deaths over the years, not just at the camp but throughout the surrounding area. They had developed their own twisted rituals and beliefs, seeing themselves as the rightful guardians of the land, tasked with driving out all trespassers. The trials that followed were a media circus. I was called to testify, recounting my experiences that summer and the investigation that followed. Sitting in the witness box, facing Frank and the others, I was struck by the emptiness in their eyes. There was no remorse, no recognition of the lives they had destroyed. They truly believed they were justified in their actions. In the end, justice was served, at least in the eyes of the law. Frank and his cohorts were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The forests around Camp Willow Creek were thoroughly searched, and authorities were confident that all members of the group had been apprehended. But for me, Todd, and the others who had lived through those terrifying events, the scars remained. The camp was eventually bulldozed, the land reclaimed by nature. A memorial was erected for the victims, a somber reminder of the lives lost to senseless violence. Years have passed since then, but the memories haven't faded. I still have nightmares about that summer, about the man in the woods and the horrors we uncovered. I've tried to move on, to build a life that isn't defined by those events, but it's not easy. I became a child psychologist, hoping to help kids who've been through traumatic experiences. Every day I see the long-lasting effects of violence and fear on young minds, and it reminds me of Jeremy and the other children who never got the chance to heal. Todd went into law enforcement, driven by a need to protect others from the kind of evil we encountered. We still meet up regularly, bound by a shared experience that few others can understand. Our conversations often drift back to that summer, analyzing and reanalyzing every detail, as if we might find some new insight that could make sense of it all. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself wondering if we really did uncover the whole truth. Are there still secrets hidden in those woods? Are there others out there, indoctrinated into that twisted ideology, waiting for their chance to strike? I try to push these thoughts away, to focus on the good I can do in the present. But I can't help but feel that my experience at Camp Willow Creek has forever changed me, forever connected me to a dark chapter in history that most people will never fully understand. As I sit here, 66 years old, and looking back on that fateful summer, I realize that the events at Camp Willow Creek didn't just change me. They shaped the course of my entire life. The horror we experienced there cast a long shadow, influencing every decision, every relationship, every moment of peace or anxiety in the decades that followed. The nightmares have lessened over the years, but they never truly went away. There are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the image of Frank's twisted smile or Jeremy's broken body fresh in my mind. On those nights, I find myself reaching for the phone, dialing Todd's number before I even realize what I'm doing. Todd and I have remained close over the years, bound by a shared trauma that no one else can fully understand. He retired from the police force a few years ago, but old habits die hard. He still keeps tabs on any unusual occurrences in the area around the old campsite, always vigilant, always prepared for the worst. Last year, on the 20th anniversary of that terrible summer, Todd and I decided to return to the site of Camp Willow Creek. The memorial for the victims still stands, a somber granite obelisk in a small clearing. The forest has reclaimed much of the land, erasing almost all traces of the camp that once stood there. As we stood there, paying our respects to Jeremy and the others who lost their lives, I felt a chill run down my spine. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure watching us from the tree line, a tall, gaunt silhouette with a wild beard. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked Todd, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded grimly, his hand instinctively moving to where his service weapon used to be. "Probably just a deer," he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We spent the rest of the day combing through the surrounding woods, looking for any sign of human presence. We found nothing concrete, just a few oddly arranged stones that could have been natural formations or could have been left by human hands. It was enough to leave us unsettled, to reignite that spark of fear and doubt that had never fully extinguished. On the drive back home, Todd and I had a long, serious conversation. We discussed the possibility that we had missed something all those years ago, that there could be more to the story than we knew. We talked about going to the authorities, about launching a new investigation, but in the end we decided against it. Without concrete evidence, it would just be the ramblings of two old men unable to let go of the past. But we made a pact that day. We agreed to stay vigilant, to keep our eyes and ears open for any sign that the horrors of Camp Willow Creek might be stirring once again. We set up a network of contacts in the area, forest rangers, local law enforcement, even some of the more level-headed cryptid hunters who frequent the region. If anything unusual happens in those woods, we'll know about it. It's been a year since that visit, and so far things have remained quiet. But I can't shake the feeling that this story isn't over yet. Maybe it's just paranoia, the lasting effects of trauma and age playing tricks on my mind. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something out there in those woods, waiting, watching, biding its time. I've started writing everything down, creating a record of all that happened and all that we've learned since. This account you're reading now is part of that effort. If anything should happen to me or Todd, if the horrors of Camp Willow Creek should ever resurface, I want there to be a record. I want someone to know the truth. To anyone reading this, I implore you, stay vigilant. The world is full of dark corners where evil can take root and grow. What happened at Camp Willow Creek could happen again, anywhere, at any time. It's up to us, all of us, to remain aware, to protect the innocent, and to shine a light into those dark corners. As for me, I'll continue my work as a child psychologist, helping young minds heal from trauma and fear. It's my way of honoring Jeremy and all the other victims, of trying to bring some good out of all the horror we experienced. And every so often, when the nights grow long and the shadows seem to creep closer, I'll find myself looking out the window towards the distant mountains where Camp Willow Creek once stood. I'll remember that summer, the lives lost, the evil we faced, and I'll remind myself that the greatest weapon against such darkness is to never forget, to never stop fighting, and to never lose hope that good can triumph over evil. The story of Camp Willow Creek may be over, but its lessons and its warnings will live on through me, through Todd, and now through you. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the most idyllic places can hide the darkest secrets. My name is Charles Smith, and I am 72 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 1999, when I was just 17. It was a summer that changed my life forever, a summer that still haunts my dreams even after all these years. I remember it like it was yesterday, the excitement bubbling in my chest as I stepped off the bus at the entrance to Camp Whispering Pines. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled my nostrils, a welcome change from the city's pollution. I hefted my duffel bag over my shoulder, gazing up at the towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets to each other in the gentle breeze. I was here as a first-time camp counselor, eager to earn money for college and escape the stifling heat of the city for a summer. Little did I know that this idyllic forest setting would become the backdrop for the most terrifying experience of my life. The camp director, a portly man named Frank Holloway, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Welcome to Camp Whispering Pines, Charles," he said, his voice gruff but friendly. "We're glad to have you on board. Let's get you settled in and introduce you to the rest of the team." As we walked towards the main lodge, Frank filled me in on the camp's history. "Camp Whispering Pines has been around since the 1950s, he explained. "We've had our ups and downs over the years, but we've always managed to bounce back. This summer's looking to be one of our best yet." I nodded, taking in the rustic charm of the place. The main lodge was a large 2-story log cabin with a wide porch and rocking chairs. Surrounding it were smaller cabins, presumably for the campers. In the distance I could see a shimmering lake, its surface reflecting the late afternoon sun. Inside the lodge I met the other counselors who had arrived early to help prepare for the campers' arrival. There was Cliff, our head counselor, a burly guy with a booming laugh that seemed to shake the rafters. Vanessa, a no-nonsense girl from Boston, sized me up with a critical eye before offering a curt nod. Leo, a quiet guy with shaggy hair and a guitar case slung over his shoulder, gave me a shy wave. And then there was Katya, a Russian exchange student with an infectious smile that made my heart skip a beat. "All right, team," Frank said, clapping his hands together. "You've got a week to get this place shipshape before the kids arrive. Cliff will assign your duties. Remember, we're here to create a safe, fun environment for these kids. Some of them have never been away from home before, so let's make sure they have a summer to remember." As Frank left us to our tasks, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This was going to be a great summer, I thought. Little did I know how wrong I was. The week before the campers arrived passed in a blur of activity. We cleaned cabins, repaired equipment, and stocked supplies. In the evenings, we'd gather around the campfire, sharing stories and getting to know each other better. It was during one of these nights that Cliff told us about the camp's dark history. "You know," he said, his voice low and serious, "there's an old legend about this place." We all leaned in, eager to hear more. Years ago, there was a handyman who worked here named Sam. They say he went crazy one summer and disappeared into the woods. Some folks reckon he's still out there, roaming the forest, looking for campers to take. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. I looked around at the others, trying to gauge their reactions. Vanessa scoffed, clearly unimpressed. Leo shifted uncomfortably while Katya's eyes were wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "That's just a story to scare the kids, right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Cliff shrugged, the firelight casting eerie shadows across his face. "Maybe, but strange things have happened in these woods over the years. Best to keep your wits about you." The conversation moved on to lighter topics, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I found myself straining to hear any unusual sounds from the surrounding forest. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The next few days passed without incident, and soon enough the campers arrived. The camp came alive with the sound of children's laughter and the bustle of activities. I was assigned to a group of 12-year-old boys, and I threw myself into my role as their counselor. We went hiking, learned to build fires, and spent hours by the lake fishing and swimming. It wasn't until the third week that things started to get weird. At first, it was just little things. Tools would go missing from the shed, only to turn up in odd places days later. Food disappeared from the kitchen at an alarming rate, more than could be explained by midnight snacking. One night, as I was doing a final check of the cabins, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind the dining hall. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and undergrowth. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a shadowy figure darting between the trees. My heart raced as I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But there was no response, only the sound of receding footsteps crunching through the underbrush. I reported the incident to Cliff the next morning, but he brushed it off. "Probably just a deer," he said, but I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. As the days went by, more strange occurrences piled up. Campers reported hearing whispers in the night when everyone was supposed to be asleep. Objects would move seemingly on their own. And always there was the feeling of being watched, especially when we ventured into the deeper parts of the forest. The other counselors were starting to notice too. Vanessa's usual bravado was slipping, replaced by a nervous energy. Leo spent more time than ever with his guitar, as if the music could ward off the growing sense of unease. And Katya seemed to be withdrawing into herself, her bright smile appearing less and less frequently. I tried to rationalize it all. We were in the woods after all. Strange noises and movements were to be expected, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The legend of Sam the handyman kept creeping back into my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it. Little did I know these were just the first signs of the horror that was about to unfold at Camp Whispering Pines. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I remember because we had just finished the weekly campfire sing-along, and the kids were heading back to their cabins, still giggling and chattering about the silly songs and skits. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasted marshmallows, and a nearly full moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the camp. Katya and I were on night duty, making sure all the campers were settled in their bunks. We had just finished our rounds and were heading back to the counselor's cabin when we heard it, a blood-curdling scream that shattered the peaceful night. We looked at each other for a split second before breaking into a run towards the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from Cabin 7, where some of the younger boys were staying. As we approached, we could hear panicked voices and the sound of someone crying. I burst through the door, Katya right behind me. The scene inside was chaos. Kids were huddled on their bunks, wide-eyed with fear. In the center of the room stood Jeremy, one of the 8-year-olds, tears streaming down his face. Timmy, he stammered when he saw us. Timmy's gone. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, gone? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm for the sake of the frightened children. He was right there, Jeremy pointed to an empty bottom bunk. We were talking and then I fell asleep. When I woke up just now, he wasn't there. I thought maybe he went to the bathroom, but then I saw. What did you see, Jeremy? Katya asked gently, kneeling down beside the boy. Jeremy's lower lip trembled. There was a man, standing right there by the window. He was looking at me and then he just disappeared. I exchanged a worried glance with Katya. Okay, everyone stay calm, I said, my mind racing. Katya, can you stay here with the boys? I'm going to get Cliff and the others. We'll find Timmy, don't worry. I sprinted to the counselor's cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. Kids didn't just vanish into thin air, and that man Jeremy saw, could it be? No, I told myself, it was just a story. It had to be. I burst into the cabin, startling Cliff and the others who were playing cards. Timmy's missing, I gasped out. We need to search the camp, now. Cliff's face turned grave. He immediately took charge, organizing us into search parties. Charles, you and Leo take the east side of the camp. Vanessa and I will cover the west. Frank's gone into town for supplies, so we'll have to handle this ourselves for now. Keep your radios on at all times. If you find anything at all, you call it in immediately. Got it? We all nodded, the severity of the situation sinking in. As we headed out into the night, flashlights in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far more sinister than a simple case of a wandering child. Leo and I searched for hours, calling Timmy's name until our voices were hoarse. We checked every building, every bush, every shadowy corner of the camp, but there was no sign of the boy. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we regrouped at the main lodge, exhausted and disheartened. Nothing, Cliff said, his usual booming voice subdued. Not a goddamn trace. What do we do now? Vanessa asked, her tough exterior cracking to reveal genuine fear. Cliff ran a hand over his face. We have to call the authorities, and the boy's parents. God, how am I going to tell them? As Cliff went to make the difficult phone calls, the rest of us sat in stunned silence. The enormity of what had happened was starting to sink in. A child had vanished under our watch, and worse, we had no idea how or why. I thought back to Jeremy's words about the man he'd seen. Could it have been Sam, the legendary handyman? But that was impossible. It was just a campfire story, wasn't it? Yet as I looked at the haunted expressions on my fellow counselors' faces, I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Something evil had come to Camp Whispering Pines, and Timmy was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, search parties, and frantic parents arriving to collect their children. The camp was in chaos, with rumors flying and fear palpable in the air. The police seemed skeptical of our accounts, especially when we mentioned the strange occurrences leading up to Timmy's disappearance. I could see the doubt in their eyes as we told them about the missing tools, the shadowy figure in the woods, and Jeremy's sighting of the mysterious man. Look, one of the detectives said, his voice tinged with frustration. We understand you're all shaken up, but we need to focus on the facts. A young boy is missing. That's our priority right now. But as the days stretched on with no sign of Timmy, even the police began to look rattled. They brought in dogs to search the woods, but the animals would get to a certain point and then whine and refuse to go further. Divers searched the lake but found nothing. It was as if Timmy had simply vanished into thin air. The camp population dwindled as more and more parents arrived to take their children home. Those who remained were subdued, jumping at shadows and huddling together in groups. We counselors did our best to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but it was a losing battle. One evening, about a week after Timmy's disappearance, I found myself sitting by the lake, unable to sleep. The moon reflected off the still water, creating an almost ethereal scene that belied the darkness that had settled over the camp. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Cliff approaching. He sat down heavily beside me, his face etched with worry. For a long moment we sat in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Then Cliff spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't the first time, you know. I turned to look at him, a chill running down my spine. What do you mean? Cliff sighed, suddenly looking much older than his years. Back in the 80s, before my time here, 2 kids disappeared, just like Timmy. They never found them. The camp closed down for a few years after that. I felt a surge of anger. Why didn't you tell us this before? We had a right to know. Cliff met my gaze, his eyes filled with regret. Would you have taken the job if you knew? Would any of us? Frank thought. We thought it was in the past, that it couldn't happen again. I wanted to yell at him, to blame him for what had happened, but the defeated slump of his shoulders stopped me. He was carrying this burden, had been carrying it all along. What happened back then? I asked instead. Do you know? Cliff shook his head. Not really. Frank doesn't like to talk about it. All I know is that it happened around the same time that Sam, the handyman, disappeared. The mention of Sam sent a shiver through me. Do you think... Could the stories about him be true? Before Cliff could answer, we heard a scream from the direction of the cabins. We jumped to our feet and ran towards the sound, our conversation forgotten in the face of a new crisis. As we approached the counselor's cabin, we saw Vanessa stumbling out the door, her face pale as a ghost. There's someone in there, she gasped, pointing back inside. Cliff pushed past her into the cabin with me close behind. The interior was dark, but in the dim light filtering through the windows I could make out a figure standing in the corner. It was tall and gaunt, with wild, matted hair and clothes that hung in tatters. For a moment time seemed to stand still. Then the figure moved faster than seemed possible. It lunged towards us, and I caught a glimpse of mad feral eyes and teeth bared in a snarl. Cliff shoved me backwards, out of the cabin, and slammed the door shut. "Run!" he yelled. "Get to the main lodge and call the police." I hesitated for a split second, not wanting to leave Cliff alone with whatever that thing was. But then I heard the sound of breaking glass from inside the cabin, and my survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed Vanessa's arm and we ran, our feet pounding against the dirt path. As we reached the main lodge, I risked a glance back. What I saw made my blood run cold. The figure from the cabin was outside now, silhouetted against the moonlight, and it was coming after us. We burst into the main lodge, slamming the door behind us. Vanessa's hands shook as she fumbled with the lock while I ran to the phone. As I dialed 911, I could hear scratching at the door, like an animal trying to claw its way in. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice seemed surreal in contrast to the panic coursing through my veins. We need help at Camp Whispering Pines, I gasped out. There's something here. It's attacking us. Please send someone quick. As I gave them the details, I heard a crash from outside. Vanessa let out a strangled cry. The window! It's trying to get in through the window! I dropped the phone and rushed to Vanessa's side. Through the window, I could see a dark shape moving, trying to force its way in. The glass cracked under the pressure, spiderweb patterns spreading across its surface. We need to barricade ourselves in, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Help me move this bookcase. Together we pushed the heavy wooden bookcase in front of the window. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy us some time. We could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Help was coming, but would it be soon enough? Suddenly the scratching and pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell over the lodge. Vanessa and I exchanged a look of confusion and terror. Had it given up, or was it just waiting for us to let our guard down? Then we heard it, a low, guttural laugh coming from outside. It didn't sound human. It was the kind of laugh that sends chills down your spine and makes your blood run cold. "Charles," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What is that thing?" Before I could answer, the door to the lodge burst open. We both screamed, expecting to see the monstrous figure. Instead, it was Katya, her eyes wide with panic. "Cliff," she gasped. "It's got Cliff." My heart sank. "What? Where?" "By the lake," Katya said. "I saw it dragging him towards the water. We have to help him." I hesitated. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay put, to wait for the police. But Cliff had saved my life back at the cabin. I couldn't abandon him now. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Vanessa, you stay here. When the police arrive, tell them where we've gone. Katya, show me where you saw them." Vanessa nodded, her face pale but determined. Katya and I slipped out of the lodge and into the night. The moon had disappeared behind a bank of clouds, plunging the camp into near total darkness. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could towards the lake, every snapping twig and rustling leaf making us jump. As we neared the shore, I could make out two figures in the gloom. One was on the ground, not moving. The other was hunched over it, doing something. I felt bile rise in my throat. "Cliff!" I called out, hoping against hope that he was still alive. The hunched figure straightened and turned towards us. In the dim light, I could finally see it clearly. It was a man, or what was left of a man. His skin was pale and mottled, his hair wild and matted with leaves and twigs. His clothes hung in tatters, revealing a body that was unnaturally thin. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. They glowed with an inhuman, feral intelligence. "Sam," I whispered, the name escaping my lips before I could stop it. The creature, for I couldn't think of it as a man anymore, grinned, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "You shouldn't have come back," it rasped, its voice like dead leaves scraping across stone. It started moving towards us with unnatural speed. I grabbed Katya's hand and yelled, "Run!" We tore through the woods, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear it behind us, getting closer. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror kept me going. Suddenly, Katya's hand was torn from mine. I spun around to see her on the ground, Sam looming over her. Without thinking, I charged at him, tackling him to the ground. We rolled down a small embankment, grappling in the dirt. His strength was inhuman, and his nails raked across my skin, drawing blood. I fought with everything I had, knowing that if I lost, I would die here in these dark woods. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, a gunshot rang out. Sam's body jerked and he let out an inhuman howl. More shots followed, and he finally released me, stumbling back into the shadows of the forest. I lay there, gasping for breath as flashlights swept the area. Police officers swarmed around us, some pursuing Sam into the woods, others checking on me and Katya. "Are you all right, son?" a gruff voice asked. I looked up to see an older officer extending his hand to me. I took it, wincing as I got to my feet. "Cliff," I managed to say, "by the lake. He needs help." The officer nodded and barked orders to his men. As they carried me to an ambulance, I caught a glimpse of them bringing a body bag up from the lakeshore. I closed my eyes, a wave of grief washing over me. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms and police interviews. They found Timmy's body in a cave deep in the woods, along with evidence of other victims from years past. Sam's lair, they called it. The story made national news, the crazy hermit who had been living in the woods for decades preying on campers. But those of us who had been there, who had seen Sam up close, knew there was more to it than that. There was something not quite human about him, something that defied rational explanation. Camp Whispering Pines was shut down permanently. The land was sold off to developers, the buildings torn down. It was as if everyone wanted to erase the memory of what had happened there. I went to college that fall, trying to move on with my life, but the memories haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sam's feral grin, heard Cliff's final scream. I wondered if there was something I could have done differently, something that could have saved them. Years passed. I built a life for myself, got married, had kids of my own, but I never took them camping. I never told them about that summer at Camp Whispering Pines. It wasn't until I was in my 50s that I finally reached out to the others. Leo had become a successful musician, his songs hinting at the darkness we had experienced. Katya was a counselor herself now, working with troubled youth. Vanessa had disappeared a few years after that summer. No one knew what had happened to her. We met at a small diner, the three of us who remained. At first, we made awkward small talk, dancing around the real reason we were there. But as the hours passed and the coffee grew cold, we began to talk about that summer. We talked about Cliff's bravery, about Timmy's infectious laugh. We talked about the fear, the confusion, the grief, and we talked about Sam, about the inexplicable evil we had encountered. "Do you think it's really over?" Katya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo and I exchanged a look. We both knew the answer, even if we didn't want to admit it. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I do know this. What happened at Camp Whispering Pines, it changed us. It showed us that there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that lurk in the shadows of our comfortable lives. We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Leo raised his coffee cup. "To survival," he said simply. Katya and I raised our cups as well. "To survival," we echoed. As I sit here now, an old man looking back on a long life, I can't help but think about that summer, about the thin line between our safe, rational world and the darkness that lurks just beyond, about how quickly everything we think we know can be turned upside down. I've never told this story before, not the whole truth of it, but I'm telling it now because I think it's important. Important to remember that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we like to admit. Important to be prepared, to be vigilant, because sometimes the monsters aren't just stories we tell around the campfire. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're waiting for us in the whispering pines. My name is James Martinez, and I am 70 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 2003 when I was 24. It was a time when I thought I had the world figured out, a time when the shadows in the woods were just shadows, and the monsters were confined to campfire stories. How wrong I was. I had just graduated with a degree in environmental science from the University of Vermont. The future stretched out before me, full of promise and potential. But before diving into the real world, I decided to take a summer job at Camp Pinewood in the Adirondacks. You know the type, one of those picturesque places where you get lost in the trees and forget about the city. I needed the break. Or at least I thought I did. I was never really the camp counselor type. My idea of communing with nature usually involved a well-marked trail and a comfortable bed waiting at the end of the day. But my buddy Trent had been working at Camp Pinewood for years and was now the head counselor. He promised it would be a breeze, a few months of hiking, swimming, and roasting marshmallows with a bunch of kids. Plus, it would look good on my resume, showing I could handle responsibility and work with children. Little did I know that summer would change everything. The drive up to Camp Pinewood was beautiful. The roads wound through dense forests, occasionally offering glimpses of sparkling lakes and towering mountains. As I pulled into the camp's gravel driveway, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The main lodge was a large, rustic building with a wide porch and a sign that read, "Welcome to Camp Pinewood," in faded red letters. Trent was waiting for me on the porch, his familiar grin a welcome sight. He hadn't changed much since college, still tall and lanky, with a mop of curly brown hair and a perpetual tan. "James, you made it," he called out, bounding down the steps to greet me. "How was the drive?" "Not bad," I replied, stretching as I got out of the car. "Beautiful country up here." Trent helped me with my bags, chatting away about the upcoming summer. "We've got a great group of kids coming in this year. You'll be in charge of Cabin 7, 10-year-olds. They're a good bunch, just full of energy." As we walked towards the cabins, I took in my surroundings. The camp was nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. A path led down to a large lake that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Various activity areas were scattered around, an archery range, a ropes course, and several fire pits for evening gatherings. "This is you," Trent said, stopping in front of a small wooden cabin. It was simple but cozy looking, with a small porch and 2 windows. "Get settled in. Orientation for the new counselors starts in an hour." As Trent walked away, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the scent of pine. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was peaceful, idyllic even. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a feeling barely perceptible, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I shook it off, chalking it up to nerves about the new job. Little did I know that feeling was the first whisper of the horror that was to come. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The campers arrived, a noisy, excited bunch of kids ranging from 8 to 15 years old. My group, the 10-year-olds of Cabin 7, were a lively bunch. There was Mike, the unofficial leader of the group, always ready with a joke or a dare. Sarah, the quiet bookworm who nevertheless had a mischievous streak. Timmy, the smallest of the group, wide-eyed and eager to please. And then there was Danny, a sullen boy who seemed to resent being there. Our days quickly fell into a routine. Morning started with a bell ringing through the cool, crisp air. The kids would groan and moan, but eventually they'd get up, and we'd all head to the mess hall for breakfast. The food was typical camp fare: pancakes, eggs, and bacon, with fruit for those who wanted it. After breakfast, we'd split up for morning activities. Some days we'd go hiking, exploring the trails around the camp. Other days we'd head down to the lake for swimming and canoeing. The afternoons were filled with more structured activities: arts and crafts, sports, nature studies. Despite my initial reservations, I found myself enjoying the work. There was something rewarding about seeing the kids learn new skills, overcome fears, and form friendships. Even Danny, the sullen one, began to open up as the days went by. But there was always this weird vibe about the place, especially at night. After the kids had gone to bed, I'd often sit outside my cabin enjoying the quiet. The stars were incredible out there, away from the city lights. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light amid the darkness. It was during one of these quiet moments, about a week into the camp, that I first heard it. An odd noise coming from deeper in the forest. It wasn't any animal I could recognize, more like a scraping sound, like metal on metal. I sat up straighter, straining my ears, but as quickly as it had come, the sound vanished, leaving only the normal nighttime noises of the forest. Probably some raccoon messing with a trash can, I thought, shrugging it off. But a small part of me wasn't so sure. That night I had trouble falling asleep, the strange sound echoing in my mind. The next morning, as we were getting ready for breakfast, Timmy came up to me, his face scrunched up with worry. "Mr. Martinez," he said, "I can't find my flashlight. I know I put it under my pillow last night, but now it's gone." I helped him look, but the flashlight was nowhere to be found. "We'll find it, buddy," I reassured him, though a little part of me wondered. It wasn't like Timmy to be careless with his things. Over the next few days, more things went missing. Small stuff, but enough to get under our skin. Mike's pocket knife disappeared from his backpack. A few snacks vanished from Sarah's secret stash. Even one of the camp's walkie-talkies went missing from the main office. I mentioned it to Trent, but he brushed it off. "Kids are always losing things," he said with a laugh. "Remember how many socks you'd come home without after summer camp?" But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The missing items, the strange sound in the night, it all added up to something, but I couldn't quite figure out what. As the first week drew to a close, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for something. I couldn't explain it, even to myself, but I felt like we were being watched. Little did I know this was just the beginning of the terror that would unfold at Camp Pinewood. The second week of camp started much like the first. The days were filled with activities, laughter, and the occasional homesick tears. But underneath it all, there was a growing sense of unease. More items had gone missing: a compass from the nature center, a few more flashlights, even some food from the mess hall kitchen. The kids were starting to notice too. Whispered conversations around the campfire at night, theories ranging from a mischievous raccoon to full-blown ghost stories. I did my best to reassure them, but truth be told, I was starting to get spooked myself. It was on a Wednesday evening that things took a turn for the worse. I was leading a group of kids on a night hike, something we did once a week to teach them about nocturnal animals and star navigation. We were about a mile from camp, flashlights bobbing in the darkness, when Mike suddenly called out, "Mr. Martinez, look over there." I followed his pointing finger and saw a faint glow through the trees off to our right. It wasn't the direction of the camp, and as far as I knew, there weren't any other buildings in this part of the forest. "Let's check it out," Mike said, already starting to move in that direction. "Hold on," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "We should stick to the trail." But curiosity got the better of me, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to investigate. "Okay, we'll take a quick look, but stay close together." We made our way through the underbrush, the strange glow growing brighter as we approached. Suddenly, we stumbled into a small clearing I hadn't seen before. The source of the light became clear. It was moonlight reflecting off the metal of an old rusted-out car, half buried in the underbrush. The kids were intrigued, crowding around the vehicle. It was an old model, maybe from the 60s or 70s, its once bright paint now a dull, flaking red. Vines and moss had started to reclaim it, nature slowly erasing this intrusion. But something about it made my skin crawl. Why was it here in the middle of the forest? And why hadn't I noticed this clearing before? As I shone my flashlight over the car, something caught my eye. There, on the ground near the driver's side door, was a small object. I bent down to get a closer look, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Timmy's missing flashlight. "All right, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting late. Let's head back to camp." The kids groaned but followed my lead. As we walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping twig made me jump. When we got back to camp, I pulled Trent aside and told him about the car and the flashlight. He frowned, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern. "That's odd," he said slowly. "I've been coming to this camp for years, and I've never seen or heard about any abandoned car in the woods." "Should we call the sheriff?" I asked. Trent thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not yet, it's probably nothing. Maybe some old junk car that's been there for years and Timmy just dropped his flashlight there during a previous hike. Let's keep an eye on things for now. No need to alarm the kids or their parents over what might be nothing." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about that car. What was it doing there? And why did I have the nagging feeling that it hadn't been there before? Little did I know that rusted-out car in the clearing was just the first piece of a terrifying puzzle that was about to unfold. The discovery of the car and Timmy's flashlight haunted me for the next few days. I found myself distracted during activities, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The kids picked up on my unease, becoming more subdued themselves. Even the usually boisterous Mike was quieter than normal. I debated whether to go back to the clearing alone, to investigate further. But something held me back. Fear? Uncertainty? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But the image of that rusted-out car, half swallowed by the forest, kept appearing in my mind. It was Saturday night when things escalated. We had just finished our weekly campfire, complete with s'mores and ghost stories. As the kids shuffled off to their cabins, yawning and sticky with marshmallow, I decided to do one last perimeter check before turning in. The night was clear and cool, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows across the camp. As I walked the grounds, my flashlight sweeping back and forth, I found myself drawn towards the path that led to the clearing. I hesitated at the edge of the camp, the dark forest looming before me. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn back, to return to the safety of my cabin. But something stronger, a mix of curiosity and dread, propelled me forward. The forest was eerily quiet as I made my way down the path. No chirping crickets, no hooting owls, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. When I reached the clearing, the car was still there, a dark silhouette in the moonlight. But something was different. The driver's side door, which had been closed before, was now ajar. My heart pounding, I approached the vehicle. The beam of my flashlight revealed the interior, tattered seats, a rusted steering wheel, and a strong, musty smell. But what caught my eye were the drag marks in the dirt, leading away from the car and deeper into the woods. I should have turned back then, should have run straight to Trent's cabin and called the sheriff. But I didn't. Instead, I followed the marks, my curiosity overriding my common sense. The trail led me through dense underbrush, branches scratching at my arms and face. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, I emerged into another small clearing, and there, in the center, stood a cabin. It was a small, dilapidated structure, its wood weathered and gray. A broken window reflected the moonlight, and the porch sagged dangerously. But what drew my attention was the faint flickering light coming from inside. I crept closer, my heart thundering in my chest. As I approached the window, I could hear a low mumbling coming from inside. Slowly, carefully, I peered through the grimy glass. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. A man was hunched over a table, his back to me, He was tall and gaunt with long matted hair, but it was what was on the table that horrified me. Spread out before him were all the missing items from camp: flashlights, pocket knives, even the walkie-talkie, and among them, disturbingly, were photos. Photos of the camp, of the kids, of us counselors. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a sharp intake of breath, because suddenly the man stiffened. He turned, slowly, and I found myself staring into the most terrifying face I'd ever seen. His eyes were wild, sunken deep into a gaunt face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. A scraggly beard covered his lower face, and his teeth, visible in a snarl, were yellow and broken. But it was the look in his eyes that truly terrified me, a mixture of rage and hunger that wasn't entirely human. He saw me and let out a guttural growl, reaching for something on the table. I caught a glint of metal, a knife. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear him behind me, his heavy breathing and the snap of twigs under his feet. But fear lent me speed, and somehow I made it back to camp. I burst into Trent's cabin, gasping for breath, my clothes torn and dirty. Trent sat up in bed, startled awake by my entrance. "James, what the hell?" Between gulps of air I managed to tell him everything. The car, the cabin, the man. At first he looked at me like I was crazy, but as I described the stolen items and the photos, his expression changed to one of grim concern. "We need to call the sheriff," he said, reaching for his phone. "Now." As Trent made the call, I sank onto his bed, my legs weak and shaky. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and terrified. What had I stumbled upon? And more importantly, what danger had I brought back to the camp? Little did I know the true horror was yet to come. The next few hours passed in a blur. The sheriff, a burly man named Tom Hawkins, arrived with 2 deputies just as the sky was beginning to lighten. They took my statement, their faces growing increasingly grim as I recounted my experience. "And you're sure about this cabin?" Sheriff Hawkins asked, his thick eyebrows furrowed. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes, I'm sure. I know how it sounds, but I saw it with my own eyes." Sheriff Hawkins exchanged a look with his deputies. "All right," he said finally. "We'll check it out. But I want you two to stay here with the kids. Keep them close to the main buildings and don't let anyone wander off." As the sheriff and his men prepared to head into the woods, Trent and I gathered the other counselors. We decided to keep the kids inside for the day, citing a special indoor activity day to avoid causing panic. It wasn't easy keeping a bunch of energetic kids cooped up, but under the circumstances, it was necessary. Hours passed with no word from the sheriff. The kids were getting restless, and so were we. I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind, second-guessing everything I'd seen. Had I imagined it all? Was the stress of the job getting to me? It was late afternoon when Sheriff Hawkins finally returned. The grim look on his face told me everything I needed to know even before he spoke. "We found the clearing in the car," he said, his voice low. "But there was no cabin." My heart sank. "That's impossible," I protested. "I saw it. It was right there." The sheriff held up a hand. "I believe you saw something, son. We found drag marks just like you described. And we found this." He held up an evidence bag containing a familiar object, Timmy's flashlight. "There's more," he continued. "We did a sweep of the area and found a campsite about a mile from where you said the cabin was. It had been recently abandoned, but we found some disturbing items." He didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. "I've called in additional deputies and a K-9 unit," Sheriff Hawkins said. "We're going to do a full search of the area. In the meantime, I want you to keep everyone here in the main camp area. No one goes into the woods for any reason, understood?" We nodded, the gravity of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. As the sheriff left to coordinate the search, Trent pulled me aside. "James, are you sure about what you saw? I mean, really sure?" I looked him in the eye. "Trent, I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you there was a cabin, and that man, he was real. I can still see his eyes when I close mine." Trent nodded slowly. "Okay, I believe you. But let's keep this between us for now. No need to scare the kids more than necessary." That night was one of the longest of my life. We kept the kids distracted with movies and games, but there was an undercurrent of tension that even they could sense. Every sound from the woods made me jump, imagining that wild-eyed man lurking just beyond the tree line. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The missing cabin, the abandoned campsite, the disturbing items the sheriff had mentioned, it all added up to something sinister. But what? Little did I know the true horror was about to reveal itself, and it would change my life forever. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and forced normalcy. We kept the kids to the main camp areas, coming up with increasingly creative excuses for why we couldn't go hiking or canoeing. The police maintained a presence, with deputies patrolling the perimeter of the camp. Their presence was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder that danger lurked just beyond the tree line. Sheriff Hawkins kept us updated on the investigation. They had found more evidence of someone living rough in the woods, makeshift shelters, remnants of campfires, even some discarded food wrappers. But of the man I had seen, there was no sign. "It's like he's a ghost," the sheriff said, frustration evident in his voice. "We've got tracks that just seem to vanish into thin air." As the days wore on, the initial fear began to fade, replaced by a sort of uneasy routine. The kids, resilient as ever, adapted to the new restrictions with only minimal grumbling, but there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to break. It was on the 5th night after my encounter in the woods that it happened. I was doing my final rounds before bed, checking that all the cabin doors were locked. As I approached cabin 7, my cabin, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar. My heart racing, I called out, "Boys, everything okay in there?" No answer. I pushed the door open slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The cabin looked normal at first glance, bunks with rumpled sleeping bags, backpacks strewn about. But as I did a head count, my blood ran cold. Timmy was missing. I tore out of the cabin, shouting for Trent, for the other counselors, for anyone. Within minutes, the entire camp was awake, and a frantic search was underway. We scoured every building, every nook and cranny of the camp, calling Timmy's name. But deep down, I knew. I knew where he had gone, or rather, where he had been taken. Sheriff Hawkins arrived with more deputies and a K-9 unit. As they organized a search party to comb the woods, I pulled the sheriff aside. "I need to go with you," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I know those woods. I've seen where he might have taken Timmy." The sheriff looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay close to me. No heroics, understood?" I nodded, relief and fear warring in my chest. As we set out into the dark woods, flashlights cutting through the gloom, I couldn't shake the image of Timmy, small, scared Timmy, in the hands of that wild-eyed man. The very thought made me sick to my stomach, but it also filled me with a determination I'd never felt before. We moved through the forest, the dogs leading the way, their excited barks echoing through the trees. I led them to the clearing with the abandoned car, my heart pounding as we approached. But the clearing was empty, the car a silent sentinel in the moonlight. "Where now?" Sheriff Hawkins asked, his voice low and tense. I pointed deeper into the woods towards where I had seen the cabin. "This way, but the cabin might not be there. It wasn't there when you looked before." The sheriff nodded grimly. "We'll find it. We have to." As we pushed further into the woods, the dogs suddenly went wild, barking and pulling at their leashes. And then, through the trees, I saw it. The cabin. It was there, just as I had seen it before. "There," I shouted, pointing. "That's it." Sheriff Hawkins pulled me back as his deputies moved forward, guns drawn. They approached the cabin cautiously, calling out for anyone inside to come out with their hands up. No response. With a nod from the sheriff, they breached the door. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. "Please, let Timmy be okay," I prayed silently. Moments later, a deputy emerged, his face pale. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Sheriff Hawkins turned to me. "Stay here," he ordered, before disappearing into the cabin. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, the sheriff emerged. The look on his face made my blood run cold. "James," he said, his voice heavy, "we found Timmy." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," the sheriff said, "but you better come see for yourself." With shaking legs, I followed Sheriff Hawkins into the cabin. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw inside. The interior was a nightmare come to life. The walls were covered with photos, hundreds of them. Photos of kids from the camp, of counselors, of hikers and campers from who knows where. And in the center of it all, tied to a chair and gagged, but mercifully unharmed, was Timmy. As the deputies worked to untie him, I looked around the room in horror. On a table nearby, I saw piles of personal belongings, the missing items from camp and so much more. Wallets, watches, phones, trophies taken from countless victims. But it was a book on the table that truly chilled me to the bone. A leather-bound journal filled with names and dates. Some of the names I recognized, campers and counselors from years past. Others were strangers to me, but beside many of the names were chilling notes. Taken, escaped, disposed. As I flipped through the pages with shaking hands, the full horror of what we had uncovered began to dawn on me. This wasn't just about a few stolen items or one kidnapped child. This was something much bigger, much more terrifying. We had stumbled upon the lair of a predator, someone who had been stalking these woods for years, taking who knows how many victims. And he was still out there. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. More police arrived, along with FBI agents who took charge of the scene. Timmy was whisked away to a hospital, shaken but miraculously, physically unharmed. The camp was shut down immediately. Parents were called in the middle of the night to come and collect their children. The air was thick with fear and confusion as sleepy kids were bundled into cars, many of them not fully understanding what was happening. I sat on the steps of the main lodge, a scratchy blanket around my shoulders, watching the chaos unfold. Trent sat beside me, his face pale and drawn. "I can't believe this," he murmured, shaking his head. "All these years, how did we not know?" I had no answer for him. The same question had been running through my mind all night. How had this monster operated for so long without being caught? How many lives had been destroyed in these woods while we sang campfire songs and roasted marshmallows? As dawn broke, casting a surreal golden light over the camp, Sheriff Hawkins approached us. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "We need to talk," he said, his voice grave. He led us to his car, away from the bustle of the crime scene. Once we were seated, he took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this car, understood?" We nodded, bracing ourselves. "The man you saw, James, we think we know who he is. His name is Gerald Erickson. He was a counselor at this very camp back in the 80s. My mind reeled. "What? How is that possible?" The sheriff's face was grim. "In 1985, 3 campers went missing during a night hike. Erickson was leading the hike. When questioned, he claimed they had wandered off, that he had searched for hours but couldn't find them. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him, but, well, let's just say there were suspicions." "So he's been out here all this time?" Trent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sheriff Hawkins nodded. "Looks like it. Living off the grid, hunting." He trailed off, but we all knew what he meant. Hunting people. "We'll find him," the sheriff said, a note of determination in his voice. "We've got roadblocks set up, state troopers and forest rangers joining the search. He can't hide forever." But as I looked out at the dense forest surrounding us, I wasn't so sure. Those woods suddenly seemed vast and impenetrable, full of shadows where a man could hide for years. The next few weeks were a nightmare of police interviews, press conferences, and sleepless nights. The story broke nationally. Summer camp horror, predator's lair found in Adirondacks. Reporters swarmed the area, hungry for any details about the campground killer. Timmy, thankfully, recovered quickly, at least physically. In his statement to the police, he said he had been lured out of the cabin by a noise, then grabbed from behind. He didn't see his captor's face, and he had been blindfolded until we found him in the cabin. As for me, I couldn't shake the image of that wild-eyed man in the cabin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him there, surrounded by his wall of trophies. The FBI psychologist said it was PTSD, prescribed me medication and therapy. But no pill could erase what I had seen, what I now knew about the darkness that could lurk in the hearts of men. Weeks turned into months. The search for Gerald Erickson continued, but as time passed, hope of finding him dwindled. Some speculated that he had fled the area, perhaps even the country. Others, remembering how he had evaded capture for so long, believed he was still out there in the woods, watching, waiting. I tried to move on with my life. I got a job in environmental conservation, working to protect the very forests that now filled me with dread. But a part of me remained there, in those woods, forever changed by what I had experienced. Years have passed since that summer at Camp Pinewood. The camp never reopened. The land was eventually sold to the state and incorporated into the surrounding forest preserve. Timmy grew up, went to college, built a life for himself. We keep in touch. There's a bond between us that can never be broken. But every now and then, I'll see a news report about a hiker gone missing in the Adirondacks, or hear about strange sightings in the woods, and I'll wonder, is he still out there, still watching, still hunting? And on dark nights, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself listening for the sound of metal scraping on metal, for heavy footsteps in the underbrush, listening for the echoes of a horror that I can never truly escape. Because I know the truth that most people prefer to ignore. Sometimes the monsters in our campfire stories are real, and sometimes they're closer than we ever dare to imagine. It's been over 2 decades since that fateful summer at Camp Pinewood, and still, the memories haunt me. I've built a life for myself, a good life, with a loving family and a fulfilling career. But there's always a part of me that remains vigilant, always watching the shadows. Gerald Erickson was never found. The case went cold after a few years, joining the sad litany of unsolved mysteries that pepper the history of the Adirondacks. But for those of us who lived through that summer, the story never truly ended. Timmy, now Tim, and I still meet up once a year, usually around the anniversary of his rescue. We don't talk much about what happened. We don't need to. The understanding between us goes deeper than words. Last year, as we sat in a quiet bar nursing our drinks, Tim suddenly spoke up. "You know, James, I've never thanked you properly," he said, his voice low, "for finding me that night. For everything." I shook my head. "You don't need to thank me, Tim. I just did what anyone would have done." He smiled sadly. "No, not anyone. You went back into those woods knowing what was out there. That takes a special kind of courage." We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Tim spoke again. "Do you ever wonder if he's still out there?" I didn't need to ask who he meant. "Sometimes," I admitted, "on bad nights." Tim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Me too." As we parted ways that night, I found myself thinking about the nature of fear, of trauma, of the invisible scars we carry with us. The events of that summer changed me, changed all of us, in ways both subtle and profound. But as I've grown older, I've come to realize something important. Yes, there is darkness in this world, capable of terrible things, but there is also light. There is courage and resilience, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of adversity. Gerald Erickson, the monster in the woods, sought to destroy lives, and in many ways, he succeeded. But he also underestimated the human spirit. For every life he ruined, there were others who survived, who fought back, who refused to let the darkness win. As I write these words, I can look out my window and see the edge of the forest. Those trees that once filled me with such terror now seem different. Still mysterious, still worthy of respect, but no longer the realm of nightmares they once were. I've come to understand that the real monsters aren't the shadows in the woods or the bumps in the night. The real monsters are the darkness that can live inside people, the capacity for cruelty that sometimes seems all too human. But I've also learned that this darkness isn't the whole story. For every Gerald Erickson in the world, there are countless others who choose light over darkness, who rush to help rather than to harm. I think of the sheriff and his deputies, tirelessly searching the woods. I think of Trent, standing by me through the chaos. I think of Tim, who survived unimaginable terror and grew into a man of compassion and strength. And I think of myself, not as a hero, but as someone who faced his fears and did what needed to be done. In doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Last month I received a letter. It was from a woman whose brother had gone missing in the Adirondacks in the early 1990s. She had read about the Camp Pinewood case and the journal we found in Erickson's cabin. Her brother's name had been in that journal. "For years we didn't know what happened to him," she wrote. "It's a terrible thing to know now, but in a way, it's also a relief. At least we know. At least we can stop wondering." Her words struck a chord with me. They reminded me that even in the darkest stories, there can be a kind of closure, a way forward. I've often wondered why I felt compelled to write down this story after all these years. Perhaps it's a way of exorcising the last of my demons, of finally putting the events of that summer to rest. Or perhaps it's a warning, a reminder that we must always be vigilant against the darkness, both in the world and in ourselves. But more than anything, I think it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the light that can shine even in the deepest darkness. As I finish writing, the sun is setting, casting long shadows across my yard. In a few hours, night will fall, and the forest will be cloaked in darkness. But I'm no longer afraid of what might be lurking in those shadows, because I know now that the most important battles aren't fought in dark woods or abandoned cabins. They're fought in the human heart, in the choices we make every day to be kind, to be brave, to stand up for what's right. Gerald Erickson may still be out there somewhere, a bogeyman haunting the edges of my memory, but he no longer has power over me. I've seen the face of true evil, and I've seen it defeated not by force, but by the simple, stubborn goodness of ordinary people doing the right thing. And in the end, that's the story I want to tell. Not just a tale of terror in the woods, but a reminder of the light that shines in all of us. A light that, no matter how deep the darkness, can never truly be extinguished. As I close my notebook, I glance out the window one last time. The forest stands silent, a wall of shadows against the darkening sky. But for the first time in years, I feel no fear. Instead, I feel something else, hope, because I know now that no matter what lurks in the shadows, we have the power to face it, to fight it, to overcome it. And in that knowledge, I finally find peace. My name is Thomas Wilson, and I am 75 years old. What I'm about to tell you is something that happened to me back in the summer of 1999. I was 25 at the time, working a dead-end job at a local diner called The Greasy Spoon in Albany, New York. My life felt like it was going nowhere fast. Every day was the same monotonous routine. Wake up, serve mediocre coffee to grumpy customers, go home, repeat. I was stuck in a rut, trying to figure out what to do with my life. That's when my best friend, Malcolm Reynolds, came to me with an idea that would change everything. Malcolm and I had been friends since high school. He was always the adventurous one, always looking for the next thrill. He burst into the diner one day during my shift, his eyes alight with excitement. "Tommy," he exclaimed, sliding into a booth, "I've got our ticket out of this dump for the summer." I raised an eyebrow, wiping down the counter. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "Camp counselors, man. Up at Camp Iversky in the Adirondacks. It'll be fun. Just a bunch of kids, campfires, and some easy money. What do you say?" I hesitated. The idea of spending a summer in the woods with a bunch of screaming kids wasn't exactly my idea of a good time. But then again, anything seemed better than another 3 months of flipping burgers and wiping tables. "I don't know, Mal," I said, refilling his coffee cup. "I'm not exactly the outdoorsy type." Malcolm leaned in, his voice low. "Come on, Tommy. When was the last time you did something exciting? This could be just what you need to shake things up." I looked around the dingy diner at the peeling wallpaper and the flickering fluorescent lights. He had a point. I needed a change. "All right," I said finally. "I'm in." Malcolm whooped, drawing stares from the few customers scattered around the diner. "You won't regret this, Tommy. It's going to be the best summer of our lives." Little did I know just how wrong he would be. A week before the campers were due to arrive, Malcolm and I packed up his beat-up Chevy and hit the road. The drive to Camp Iversky took us deep into the heart of the Adirondack Mountains. As we wound our way through the dense forest, The trees seemed to press in on us from all sides, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. "Man, this place is really out in the sticks," I commented, peering out the window at the endless sea of green. Malcolm grinned, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to the beat of some old rock song on the radio. "That's the beauty of it, Tommy. No cell phones, no internet, just us and nature." I wasn't so sure that was a good thing, but I kept my doubts to myself. After what felt like hours of driving down increasingly narrow and bumpy roads, we finally saw a wooden sign looming ahead. "Welcome to Campfires, where adventure awaits." The paint was faded and peeling, and the sign creaked ominously in the breeze. As we pulled into the main area of the camp, I got my first good look at our home for the next 2 months. The campgrounds were huge, sprawling over what seemed like miles of dense forest. The main area had a large rustic mess hall, a circle of weathered cabins, and a rickety dock stretching out into a murky lake. "Well, what do you think?" Malcolm asked, slamming the car door shut and stretching his arms wide. I took in the scene before me. The buildings all looked like they had seen better days, with peeling paint and sagging roofs. The air was thick with the smell of pine and something else I couldn't quite place. A musty, almost rotten odor that made my nose wrinkle. "It's rustic," I said diplomatically. Malcolm laughed, clapping me on the back. "That's one word for it. Come on, let's go meet the others." We made our way to the mess hall, where we found a group of about a dozen other counselors gathered. They were a mixed bag. Some looked to be college kids. Others seemed to be in the same boat as Malcolm and me, looking for a summer gig to escape their regular lives. A tall, lanky guy with shaggy brown hair approached us, a friendly smile on his face. "Hey there, you must be the new guys. I'm Mark." We introduced ourselves, and Mark gave us a quick rundown of the other counselors. There was Julie, a petite blonde from Vermont with a sharp wit and an infectious laugh. Samantha, a quiet, bookish girl with thick glasses. Derek, a muscular ex-college athlete, and several others whose names blurred together in my mind. As we chatted, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the other counselors kept glancing nervously at the woods surrounding the camp, or the way their laughter seemed a bit too forced, a bit too loud. But I pushed these thoughts aside, chalking it up to my own nervousness about the new situation. Little did I know that those uneasy feelings were just the beginning. The true horrors of Camp Iversky were yet to reveal themselves, and when they did, our lives would never be the same. That evening, after a day of orientation and setting up our cabins, the counselors decided to have a little campfire by the lake. It was one of those perfect summer nights, the kind where the sky is so clear you can see every star, and the air is warm with just a hint of a cool breeze. We gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories about our lives back home. Julie, the girl from Vermont, had us all in stitches with her tales of small-town drama. "So there I was," she said, gesturing wildly with her marshmallow stick, stuck between Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning pig and the pastor's wife, both of them covered head to toe in mud. As we laughed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie growing between us. Maybe this summer wouldn't be so bad after all. As the night wore on, the stories took a darker turn. Mark leaned in, his face cast in eerie shadows by the flickering fire. "You guys want to hear about the legend of Camp Iversky?" he asked, his voice low and ominous. We all nodded eagerly, huddling closer to the fire. Mark cleared his throat. "They say that back in the 1950s, there was a counselor here named Robert Graves. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly. But one summer he just snapped. They found him deep in the woods, surrounded by the bodies of 3 campers. He was just sitting there, rocking back and forth, mumbling something about the whispers in the trees." A chill ran down my spine, and I noticed several of the others shifting uncomfortably. "They took him away, of course," Mark continued, "locked him up in some asylum. But they say that on quiet nights you can still hear him out there in the woods, whispering to the trees." As if on cue, a gust of wind rustled through the leaves, causing several of us to jump. Julie laughed nervously. "Come on, Mark, that's just a story to scare the kids, right?" Mark shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Maybe, but I've heard some strange things in these woods at night, things that can't be explained." An uneasy silence fell over the group. I found myself straining to hear any unusual sounds coming from the dark forest surrounding us. That's when we heard it. A scream, not a playful scream or a prank. This was pure terror. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the water and chilling us to the bone. We all froze, staring at each other, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. Maybe it's a coyote, Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Malcolm shook his head. Coyotes don't scream like that. It sounded human. Without a word, Malcolm grabbed a flashlight from his backpack. Stay here, he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his fear. Of course, we didn't stay put. One by one, we all grabbed flashlights and followed Malcolm into the woods. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us. The further we went, the quieter it got. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just our footsteps and heavy breathing. Then we saw her. A girl, maybe 18 or 19, standing by an old oak tree. She was barefoot, wearing a torn white dress, her long dark hair a wild mess around her pale face. Her eyes were wide with fear, darting around as if she was being hunted. Hey, are you okay? Julie called out, her voice trembling. The girl didn't respond. She just stood there, shaking, her gaze unfocused. Malcolm stepped forward, his hand outstretched. It's okay, he said softly. We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help. Before he could get any closer, the girl's head snapped towards him. For a split second, I could have sworn her eyes glowed in the darkness. Then, without warning, she bolted. She ran deeper into the woods, faster than I thought humanly possible. We chased after her, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we stumbled over roots and rocks. But it was no use. She disappeared into the night, leaving us standing there, panting and bewildered. We made our way back to camp, our excitement from earlier replaced with a heavy unease. As we sat around the dying campfire, Julie voiced the question we were all thinking. Who do you think she was? Maybe she's from one of the nearby towns, Mark suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Malcolm's face was grim as he stared into the embers. Maybe, he said slowly, she wasn't alone out there. That thought hung in the air like smoke, unspoken but understood by all of us. None of us wanted to admit it, but it was possible. The woods were vast and full of secrets, and we had just glimpsed one of them. As we headed to our cabins that night, I couldn't shake the image of the girl's terrified face from my mind. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the horrors that awaited us at Camp Iversky. The next morning we gathered in the mess hall for breakfast, all of us bleary-eyed and on edge after the events of the previous night. The incident with the girl in the woods hung over us like a dark cloud, coloring every interaction with an undercurrent of tension. As we picked at our bland oatmeal, Malcolm leaned in close to me. "We need to tell Mr. Hadley about what happened," he whispered. I nodded in agreement. Mr. Hadley was the camp director, an old, grizzled man who looked like he'd seen everything and then some. If anyone would know what to do about our midnight encounter, it would be him. After breakfast, Malcolm and I, along with Julie and Mark, made our way to Mr. Hadley's office. It was a small, cluttered room in the back of the mess hall, filled with stacks of papers, old trophies, and faded photographs of past camp seasons. Mr. Hadley was seated behind a battered desk, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. He looked up as we entered, his bushy eyebrows furrowing at the serious expressions on our faces. "What's on your minds, kids?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over rowdy campers. We took turns explaining what had happened the night before, each of us filling in details the others might have missed. As we spoke, Mr. Hadley's expression grew increasingly grim. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh, the wood creaking ominously under his weight. "There's been talk," he said slowly, his eyes distant, "about strange things happening in these woods. I've been here for over 20 years, and I've heard my fair share of stories. Missing hikers, unexplained noises, even saw something myself once." He paused, taking a long sip of his coffee. "But nothing concrete, mind you, just stories." "Do you think she's in danger?" Julie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hadley's eyes focused on her, sharp and intense. "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but we need to be careful, very careful. The campers will be arriving in a few days, and it's our job to keep them safe." He stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the camp. I want you all to keep this to yourselves for now. No need to panic the other counselors or scare the kids before they even get here. But keep your eyes open. Don't go wandering off alone, especially at night. And if you see or hear anything unusual, you come straight to me. Understood?" We all nodded solemnly. As we turned to leave, Mr. Hadley called out, "Oh, and one more thing." We paused at the door, looking back at him. "Stay away from the old trail on the north side of the camp. It's off limits for a reason." "What reason is that?" Malcolm asked. Mr. Hadley's face darkened. "Let's just say some places in these woods are best left undisturbed." With that cryptic warning, he dismissed us. As we walked back to our cabins, a heavy silence fell over our group. The excitement of the summer ahead had been replaced by a growing sense of dread. "What do you think he meant about the old trail?" Julie asked, her voice hushed. Mark shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant but failing to hide the worry in his eyes. "Probably just trying to scare us. You know how these old camp directors are, always full of spooky stories." But I wasn't so sure. The look in Mr. Hadley's eyes had been deadly serious. Whatever was going on in these woods, it was clear that he knew more than he was letting on. As we reached the circle of cabins, Malcolm pulled me aside. "Tommy," he said, his voice low, "I think we should check out that trail." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you crazy? Didn't you hear what Mr. Hadley said?" Malcolm's eyes glinted with a mixture of fear and excitement. "That's exactly why we need to check it out. If there's something dangerous out there, don't we have a responsibility to find out what it is, before the kids get here?" I wanted to argue, to tell him it was a terrible idea. But a part of me, the part that had always admired Malcolm's bravery and sense of adventure, couldn't help but agree. "All right," I said finally, "but we do it smart. We go during the day, we bring supplies, and we tell someone where we're going." Malcolm nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Deal. We'll go tomorrow morning, first light." As I watched him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into something far beyond our understanding. The woods of Camp Iversky held secrets, dark and ancient, and we were on the verge of uncovering them. Little did I know, our adventure on the old trail would set in motion a chain of events that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the sun barely visible through the thick canopy of trees. Malcolm and I met at the edge of the camp, our backpacks filled with water, snacks, and first aid supplies. We had told Julie where we were going, swearing her to secrecy but making her promise to alert Mr. Hadley if we weren't back by nightfall. As we set off towards the north side of the camp, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The ground was soft and spongy beneath our feet, decades of fallen leaves creating a thick carpet that muffled our footsteps. "Do you even know where this trail is supposed to be?" I asked Malcolm, my voice hushed despite the emptiness of the forest around us. Malcolm pointed to an old rusted sign barely visible through the undergrowth. "There," he said. "That must be it." As we approached, I could make out faded letters spelling out Whispering Pines Trail. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Mark's story about the counselor who went mad, talking about whispers in the trees. The trail itself was overgrown, barely visible beneath years of neglect. We pushed through thick bushes and low-hanging branches, the damp leaves clinging to our clothes. The air grew colder as we ventured deeper into the forest, and an unnatural silence fell around us. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if all life had been sucked out of this part of the woods. After what felt like hours of hiking, we came to a small clearing. In the center stood the remains of what must have once been a cabin. The roof had long since caved in, and nature had begun to reclaim the structure, with vines and moss covering most of the weathered wood. "Should we check it out?" Malcolm asked, his voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. I nodded reluctantly, and we approached the ruined cabin. As we got closer, I noticed something odd about the ground around it. The earth was bare, with no grass or undergrowth, forming a perfect circle around the structure. Inside, the cabin was a mess of rotting wood and rusted metal. But one thing caught my eye immediately. On the far wall, partially obscured by debris, was a large map. We cleared away the rubble to get a better look. It was a detailed map of Campfires and the surrounding forest, far more extensive than any I had seen before. Red X's were marked all over it, with dates scrawled next to each one. The most recent was just a few days ago, right around where we had seen the girl in the woods. "Tommy," Malcolm said, his voice shaking slightly. "Look at this." He was holding up an old, leather-bound journal. As he flipped through the pages, I saw sketches of strange symbols, incomprehensible notes, and most disturbingly, detailed drawings of human figures in various states of terror and agony. Before we could investigate further, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We whirled around, our hearts pounding. "Hello?" Malcolm called out. "Is someone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow move between the trees. "We should go," I said, grabbing Malcolm's arm. "Now." We hurried back down the trail, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with every step. Just as the camp came back into view, I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. "Soon," it seemed to say, the word carried on the wind. We burst out of the forest and into the safety of the camp, panting and wide-eyed. Julie rushed over to us, concern etched on her face. "What happened? You guys look like you've seen a ghost." Malcolm and I exchanged glances. How could we even begin to explain what we had found? The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. Malcolm and I debated whether to tell Mr. Hadley about what we had found in the old cabin. But in the end, we decided to keep it to ourselves for the time being. We needed more information before we started making wild accusations. Finally, the day arrived for the campers to show up. Buses rolled in, disgorging dozens of excited kids aged 8 to 16. The air filled with shouts, laughter, and the chaos of luggage being unloaded. As I helped direct campers to their assigned cabins, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me since our expedition to the old trail. Every rustle in the nearby woods made me jump, and I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, half expecting to see the mysterious girl or some other, more sinister figure watching us. That night, after the campers were settled in, we had the traditional welcome bonfire. As I looked around at the circle of young, smiling faces illuminated by the flickering flames, I felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever was going on in these woods, I was determined to keep these kids safe. Mr. Hadley stood up to give his welcome speech, his gruff voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. "Welcome to Campfires," he began. "For some of you, this is your first time here. For others, you're returning to a second home. But for all of you, this summer will be an adventure you'll never forget." If only he knew how true those words would turn out to be. As the night wore on and the campers were sent to bed, the counselors gathered for a final meeting. Mr. Hadley's face was serious as he addressed us. "Remember what I told you," he said, his eyes lingering on Malcolm and me. "Keep a close watch on the kids. Don't let anyone wander off alone, especially not near the woods. And if you see or hear anything unusual, report it to me immediately." We all nodded solemnly. As we dispersed to our respective cabins, Julie caught up with Malcolm and me. "Okay, spill it," she said, her arms crossed. "What really happened out there on the trail? And don't tell me it was nothing. You two have been acting weird ever since." Malcolm sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We found something, Julie. Something that doesn't make sense." We filled her in on the abandoned cabin, the strange map, and the disturbing journal. Julie's face grew pale as we described the whisper we had heard on our way back. "We have to tell Mr. Hadley," she insisted. "And tell him what?" I countered. "That we deliberately disobeyed his instructions and went to the off-limits trail. That we found some creepy old cabin that might not even be connected to anything." Julie bit her lip, clearly torn. "I don't like keeping secrets," she said finally. "Especially not when it could put the campers at risk." "Look," Malcolm said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Give us a few days. We'll keep our eyes open, see if we can find out anything else. If anything suspicious happens, we go straight to Mr. Hadley. Deal?" After a moment's hesitation, Julie nodded. "Deal, but I'm holding you to that." As we headed to our separate cabins, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something big, something dangerous. The summer stretched out before us, full of unknowns, and I had a sinking feeling that our adventure on the old trail was just the beginning. Little did we know the true horrors of Camp Iversky were about to reveal themselves, and our lives would never be the same. The first week of camp passed in a whirlwind of activities. Days were filled with swimming lessons, nature hikes, arts and crafts, and all the usual camp routines. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The kids were having fun, forming friendships, and enjoying their summer adventure. But underneath the cheerful exterior, there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't shake. Small things, easily dismissed on their own, began to add up. On Tuesday, during a nature hike, one of the younger campers, a quiet boy named Tim, came up to me with wide eyes. "Mr. Thomas," he whispered, tugging on my sleeve, "I saw someone in the woods, a lady in a white dress. She was watching us." My blood ran cold, remembering the girl we had seen that first night. "Where, Tim? Can you show me?" But when we went to the spot Tim had indicated, there was nothing there. No footprints, no disturbed undergrowth, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. On Thursday, Julie reported that several items had gone missing from her cabin. Nothing valuable. A hairbrush, a tube of toothpaste, a worn paperback book. But the way they had disappeared was strange. The cabin had been locked, and none of the windows had been disturbed. And then there were the noises at night, rustling in the bushes around the cabins, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Several campers complained of nightmares, vivid dreams of being lost in the woods, pursued by shadowy figures. Malcolm and I spent every free moment we had investigating, trying to make sense of what was happening. We pored over the journal we had found in the cabin, but most of it was indecipherable. The parts we could understand were troubling, references to ancient rituals, to sacrifices, to a thinning of the veil. By Friday night, the stress was starting to show on all of us. The other counselors had noticed that something was off, even if they didn't know the details. As we gathered for our nightly meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Hadley looked around at our tired, worried faces. "All right," he said gruffly. "Out with it. What's going on?" For a moment no one spoke. Then, to my surprise, it was Mark who broke the silence. "There's something wrong here, Mr. Hadley," he said, his usual joking manner nowhere to be seen. "I don't know what it is, but the woods don't feel right. It's like they're watching us." A murmur of agreement went through the group. One by one, the counselors began to share their experiences. The missing items, the strange noises, the unsettling feelings. Mr. Hadley listened silently, his face growing more grave with each story. When everyone had finished, he let out a long, heavy sigh. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "I had hoped, but no. It's happening again." "Again?" Julie asked, leaning forward. "What do you mean, again?" Mr. Hadley stood up, moving to the window. For a long moment he stared out at the dark woods surrounding the camp. When he turned back to us, his eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's time I told you the truth about Camp Iversky," he said. "The whole truth. It's not a pretty story, and you may not believe me, but you need to know what we're up against." As Mr. Hadley began his tale, I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever he was about to reveal, I had a feeling it would change everything. The real horror of Camp Iversky was about to be unveiled, and I wasn't sure any of us were prepared for what we were about to learn. Mr. Hadley's voice was low and somber as he began his story. "Camp Iversky has been here for over 100 years, he said, but the land it's built on is much, much older. The Native Americans who lived here called this place the Whispering Woods. They believed it was a thin spot between our world and something else." He paused, his eyes scanning our faces. "I know how this sounds, but I've seen things in these woods that can't be explained by any natural means." Mr. Hadley went on to tell us about the camp's dark history, disappearances that had been covered up, counselors driven to madness, strange rituals performed deep in the woods by a cult that believed they could harness the power of whatever lay beyond our world. "The man you told me about, the one from the old cabin," Mr. Hadley said, looking directly at Malcolm and me. "His name was Robert Graves. He was more than just a counselor. He was a researcher, studying the phenomena in these woods. But he went too far, tried to open a door that should have stayed closed." Julie gasped. "The girl in the woods, was she?" Mr. Hadley nodded grimly. "Graves had a daughter. She disappeared the night of his experiment. We never found her body. But every few years there are sightings, a girl in a white dress wandering the woods, always preceding a new cycle of incidents. The silence that followed was deafening. We all sat there trying to process what we had just heard. It sounded impossible, like something out of a horror movie, but deep down I knew it was true. It explained everything we had experienced. "So what do we do?" Malcolm asked, breaking the silence. "We can't just sit here and wait for something to happen. There are kids here. We need to protect them." Mr. Hadley's face hardened with resolve. "We fight," he said simply. "We protect the campers, we stick together, and we find a way to end this, once and for all." Over the next hour, we formulated a plan. We would increase patrols around the camp, never letting anyone go anywhere alone. We would research, trying to find out more about the rituals Graves had been attempting, and we would prepare for the worst, gathering supplies and creating safe zones within the camp. As we dispersed that night, the weight of our new knowledge hung heavy on all of us. The carefree summer we had envisioned had turned into something far more dangerous and important. We were no longer just camp counselors. We were guardians, standing between the innocent children in our care and an ancient, incomprehensible evil. Back in my cabin, as I lay awake listening to the sounds of the woods outside, I couldn't help but wonder, were we really prepared for what was coming? Could a group of ordinary young adults really hope to combat something that had existed for centuries? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, a whisper drifted through the cabin, so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. "Soon," it seemed to say. "Very soon." I pulled my blanket tighter around me, my eyes fixed on the window and the dark woods beyond. Whatever was out there, whatever was coming, we would face it. We had to. The lives of everyone at Camp Iversky depended on it. Little did I know our true test was just beginning. The horrors we had experienced so far were merely a prelude to the terror that awaited us in the depths of the Whispering Woods. The next few days passed in a haze of nervous energy and heightened vigilance. We did our best to maintain a sense of normalcy for the campers, but the strain was beginning to show. Dark circles appeared under eyes that constantly scanned the tree line. Voices were a little too bright, laughter a little too forced. We divided into teams, each taking shifts to patrol the camp perimeter. Malcolm and I spent every free moment poring over the journal we had found in the cabin, trying to decipher its cryptic contents. Julie threw herself into research, using the camp's ancient computer to dig up any information she could find on the history of the area and the legends surrounding it. It was Julie who made the first breakthrough. She burst into the mess hall one afternoon, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. "I found something," she said, spreading a stack of printouts on the table. "It's about the ritual Graves was trying to perform." We huddled around, scanning the pages. Most of it was in an archaic form of Latin, but Julie had managed to translate parts of it. "It talks about a convergence," she explained, her finger tracing the lines of text, "a time when the barrier between worlds is at its thinnest. According to this, it happens once every 27 years. Malcolm's face paled. "And the last incident was 26 years ago," Mr. Hadley finished, his voice grim. The implications hung heavy in the air. Whatever was coming, it was coming soon. As if on cue, a scream pierced the air, coming from the direction of the lake. We all sprinted towards the sound, our hearts pounding. We found a group of campers huddled on the dock, pointing at something in the water. As we approached, I saw it. A pale, bloated face just beneath the surface, long dark hair swirling around it like seaweed. For a split second, lifeguard training kicked in, and I prepared to dive in. But then the face turned towards us, revealing empty eye sockets and a mouth stretched wide in an impossible grin. It wasn't human. It had never been human. Before anyone could react, the thing sank back into the depths, leaving nothing but ripples on the lake's surface. We ushered the shaken campers back to their cabins, trying to come up with a rational explanation for what they had seen. But we all knew the truth. The boundary between our world and whatever lay beyond was growing thinner by the moment. That night we gathered in Mr. Hadley's office for an emergency meeting. "We need to evacuate the camp," Julie insisted. "It's not safe for the kids to be here." Mr. Hadley shook his head grimly. "We can't. The roads are out." "What do you mean, out?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. He pulled out a map of the area, pointing to the single road that led to Campfires. A storm came through last night. Huge tree down across the road, and the bridge over Blackwater Creek has been washed out. We're cut off. The silence that followed was deafening. We were trapped here with whatever horrors the woods held and a camp full of children to protect. Malcolm was the first to speak. So what's the plan? We can't just sit here and wait for things to get worse. Mr. Hadley's face hardened with resolve. We fight. We protect these kids with everything we've got, and we find a way to stop this thing once and for all. He outlined a plan. We would move all the campers into the mess hall. It was the largest, sturdiest building in the camp, and we could defend it more easily than the scattered cabins. We would set up watches, never leaving the kids alone for a moment, and we would prepare for the worst. As we dispersed to put the plan into action, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were woefully unprepared for what was coming. We were a bunch of college kids and a grizzled old camp director up against forces we barely understood. But we were all that stood between those innocent children and whatever lurked in the whispering woods. Little did we know, our true test was about to begin. The next day passed in a blur of activity. We moved the campers into the mess hall, explaining it away as a fun indoor camping experience. We stockpiled food, water, and anything that could be used as a weapon. All the while, the forest seemed to press in around us, watching, waiting. As night fell, an unnatural fog began to roll in from the woods. It crept across the grounds, thick and cloying, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers just on the edge of hearing. Inside the mess hall, we did our best to keep the kids calm. We organized games, told stories, anything to distract them from the growing sense of wrongness that permeated the air. It was just past midnight when it started. First it was just a sound, a low rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat. Then came the screams, inhuman wails that echoed through the fog-shrouded night. The kids huddled together, wide-eyed and terrified. We counselors exchanged grim looks, knowing that the moment we had been dreading had finally arrived. Mr. Hadley stood at the center of the room, his voice steady as he addressed us all. Remember the plan. Julie, Derek, you stay here with the kids. The rest of us will go out in pairs. Whatever's out there, we face it together. I found myself paired with Malcolm. As we stepped out into the fog-covered grounds, flashlights in hand, I felt a surge of gratitude for my friend's steady presence beside me. We hadn't gone more than a few yards when we saw the first apparition. A figure, vaguely human in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at impossible angles. It lurched towards us, mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Malcolm reacted first, swinging the iron crowbar he carried. It passed right through the creature, which flickered like a bad TV signal before disappearing entirely. "They're not all solid," Malcolm panted. "We need to figure out which ones are real and which ones are just projections or something." Before I could respond, a scream cut through the night. A human scream this time, coming from the direction of the lake. We ran towards it, our hearts pounding. We found Mark at the edge of the dock, grappling with what looked like the same creature we had seen in the lake earlier. But this one was all too solid. Its cold, slimy hands wrapped around Mark's throat as it tried to drag him into the water. I grabbed a fallen branch and swung with all my might. There was a sickening crunch as it connected with the creature's head. It let out an unearthly shriek and released Mark, slipping back into the dark waters of the lake. As we helped a coughing, sputtering Mark to his feet, I realized with growing horror that this was just the beginning. The woods were full of movement now, shapes flitting between the trees, some solid, some translucent, all terrifying. We regrouped at the mess hall, each pair reporting similar encounters. The camp was under siege by forces we could barely comprehend, let alone fight. It was Julie who provided a glimmer of hope. "The journal," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting warnings to the other counselors. "There was something in there about a ritual to close the breach. If we could perform it—" "It's too dangerous," Mr. Hadley interrupted. "Graves tried that and look what happened." "Do we have a choice?" Malcolm asked, his face streaked with dirt and what looked suspiciously like blood. "We're fighting a losing battle here. If there's a chance to end this, we have to take it." Mr. Hadley looked around at our battered, terrified group, then at the children huddled in the center of the mess hall. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. Julie, you and Thomas work on deciphering that ritual. The rest of us will hold the line here. Whatever comes, we keep those kids safe. As Julie and I pored over the journal, trying to make sense of its arcane scribblings, I could hear the sounds of battle outside. Screams, both human and inhuman, the crack of improvised weapons against otherworldly flesh, and through it all, that constant, maddening whisper. We had until dawn, we figured. If we couldn't close the breach by then, it would be too late. The boundary between worlds would dissolve completely, and the horrors of the Whispering Woods would be unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. As the night wore on and our time grew short, I found myself wondering how my life had led to this moment. A few weeks ago, I had been a directionless young man, flipping burgers and wondering about my future. Now I was in the middle of a war against forces beyond human comprehension, with the fate of not just Campfires, but possibly the entire world hanging in the balance. Whatever happened in the coming hours, I knew one thing for certain. After this night, nothing would ever be the same again. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Julie and I finally cracked the code of the ritual. It was complex, requiring specific components and needing to be performed at the exact spot where the boundary between worlds was thinnest. The old cabin, I realized. That's where Graves did his ritual. It has to be the place. Mr. Hadley nodded grimly. All right, Julie, Thomas, Malcolm, you three go. Perform the ritual. The rest of us will hold the line here and protect the kids. As we prepared to leave, gathering the components we needed for the ritual, I looked around at the battered, exhausted faces of my fellow counselors. They had fought bravely through the night, facing horrors that would have broken lesser individuals. Now, they were preparing for one final stand. Be careful out there, Derek said, clapping me on the shoulder, and good luck. We stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom. The fog had thinned somewhat, but the air was still thick with an otherworldly presence. As we made our way towards the old trail, shapes flitted at the edges of our vision, always just out of reach. The journey to the cabin seemed to take an eternity. Every step was a struggle against an unseen force that seemed to be trying to hold us back. By the time we reached the clearing, we were exhausted and on edge. The cabin looked different in the dim light of dawn. The bare earth around it seemed to pulse with an eerie, sickly light. As we approached, I could have sworn I saw faces pressing against the inside of the windows, their mouths open in silent screams. Let's do this, Malcolm said, his voice tight with tension. We began the ritual, Julie reading from the journal while Malcolm and I arranged the components, a mix of herbs, crystals, and other less identifiable substances. As Julie's voice rose in a chant that was definitely not Latin or any other language I recognized, the air around us began to change. The temperature dropped sharply, the sickly light pulsing from the ground grew brighter, and the whispers, which had been a constant background noise, suddenly rose to a deafening crescendo. Then, without warning, she appeared. The girl in the white dress standing at the edge of the clearing. But this wasn't the terrified girl we had seen that first night. This was something else, something that wore the girl's form like an ill-fitting suit. You cannot stop what has already begun, it said, its voice a horrifying mixture of a young girl's and something ancient and inhuman. Before we could react, it was on us. Malcolm went flying, crashing into the side of the cabin with a sickening thud. Julie's chanting faltered as the thing that looked like a girl wrapped its hands around her throat. I acted on instinct, grabbing the iron crowbar Malcolm had dropped and swinging it with all my might. It connected with the creature's head, and for a moment I saw its true form, a writhing mass of darkness and teeth and eyes so alien it hurt to look at. The creature staggered back, letting go of Julie. She gasped for air, but to her credit she immediately resumed the chant, her voice hoarse but determined. What followed was a battle unlike anything I could have imagined. Malcolm rejoined the fray, and together we fought against a being that could change its shape at will, that could be solid one moment and intangible the next. All the while Julie's voice rose and fell in that eldritch chant, the words seeming to take on a physical form in the air around us. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt something change. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. The creature let out a howl of rage and fear. Now, Julie screamed. Thomas, the talisman! I pulled out the final component of the ritual, a small carved stone that we had found hidden in the floorboards of the cabin. As I held it up, it began to glow with an inner light. The creature lunged for me, its form shifting and twisting in ways that made my eyes water. But before it could reach me, a blinding flash of light erupted from the talisman. The creature screamed, a sound of such utter anguish and loss that it brought tears to my eyes, and then silence. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the woods lifted like a veil being torn away. The sickly light faded, leaving only the warm glow of the morning sun. The whispers that had plagued us for so long finally, blessedly, fell silent. We stood there, panting and stunned, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then, from the direction of the camp, we heard cheering. As we made our way back, supporting each other on shaky legs, we saw the other counselors and the campers spilling out of the mess hall. Mr. Hadley was at the front, his grizzled face split in a grin of relief and pride. "You did it," he said simply, pulling us into a rough embrace. "You actually did it." The next few hours passed in a blur. The road to the camp was miraculously cleared, as if the fallen tree and washed-out bridge had never existed. Parents arrived to pick up their children, full of questions about the freak storm that had cut off communication with the camp. We counselors shared knowing looks, silently agreeing to keep the true events of that night to ourselves. Who would believe us anyway? As the last of the campers departed, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods with Malcolm and Julie. The forest that had seemed so menacing now looked ordinary, peaceful even. "So," Malcolm said, breaking the silence, "same time next year?" Julie punched him lightly on the arm, but she was smiling. "I think I've had enough camping to last a lifetime." As for me, I looked out at those woods, remembering everything we had been through, everything we had faced and overcome. "You know," I said slowly, "I think I might stick around. Someone needs to keep an eye on this place, make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Malcolm and Julie nodded in understanding. We had been through something extraordinary together, something that had changed us forever. We had seen the darkness that lurked at the edges of our world, and we had faced it down. As we turned to leave, I cast one last look at the woods. For a moment, just for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of white among the trees, a young girl smiling and at peace. Then she was gone, and there was only the wind rustling through the leaves. The summer of 1999 at Camp Iversky had begun as a simple job, a way to pass the time and make some money. It ended up being the defining moment of my life, the crucible in which I discovered my true strength and purpose. The darkness had been pushed back, but I knew it would always be there, waiting, and I would be ready. For I am Thomas Wilson, guardian of the Whispering Woods, protector against the things that lurk in the shadows, and this is my story. 25 years have passed since that fateful summer at Camp Iversky. I'm 75 now, my hair gone gray, and my face lined with the passage of time. But I've never forgotten the events of those few weeks, nor the responsibility I took on. I bought the camp after that summer, using every penny I had and going into debt. Over the years, I've rebuilt it, turning it into a thriving summer retreat. But more importantly, I've kept watch. Every 27 years, when the boundary grows thin, I'm ready. I've gathered a team of trusted individuals, people who have seen the truth of what lurks in the shadows. Together, we stand guard against the darkness. Malcolm and Julie have remained a part of my life, though they've moved on to other things. Malcolm became a professor of folklore and mythology, his experiences at Camp Iversky driving him to seek out the truth behind other legends. Julie went into journalism, using her skills to investigate and expose other supernatural occurrences around the world. They visit when they can, especially as the 27-year mark approaches. Mr. Hadley passed away a few years after that summer, but not before passing on everything he knew about the camp and its history. His knowledge has been invaluable in our ongoing efforts to keep the forces of darkness at bay. As for the girl in the white dress, I've seen her a few times over the years, always at a distance, always with that same peaceful smile. I like to think that by closing the breach, we not only saved our world but gave her some measure of peace as well. Now, as I sit on the porch of my cabin, looking out over the camp that has been my home and my duty for the past quarter century, I can feel it coming again. The air is growing heavy. The whispers at the edge of hearing are starting to return. The 27-year cycle is almost complete. But this time we're ready. We've learned, we've prepared, and we will not falter. For we are the guardians of Campfires, the protectors of the Whispering Woods, and as long as we stand watch, the darkness shall not prevail. As the sun sets on another day, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, I smile to myself. Let them come. We'll be waiting. We stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom. The fog had thinned somewhat, but the air was still thick with an otherworldly presence. As we made our way towards the old trail, shapes flitted at the edges of our vision, always just out of reach. The journey to the cabin seemed to take an eternity. Every step was a struggle against an unseen force that seemed to be trying to hold us back. By the time we reached the clearing, we were exhausted and on edge. The cabin looked different in the dim light of dawn. The bare earth around it seemed to pulse with an eerie, sickly light. As we approached, I could have sworn I saw faces pressing against the inside of the windows, their mouths open in silent screams. "Let's do this," Malcolm said, his voice tight with tension. We began the ritual, Julie reading from the journal while Malcolm and I arranged the components, a mix of herbs, crystals, and other less identifiable substances. As Julie's voice rose in a chant that was definitely not Latin or any other language I recognized, the air around us began to change. The temperature dropped sharply, the sickly light pulsing from the ground grew brighter, and the whispers, which had been a constant background noise, suddenly rose to a deafening crescendo. Then, without warning, she appeared. The girl in the white dress standing at the edge of the clearing. But this wasn't the terrified girl we had seen that first night. This was something else, something that wore the girl's form like an ill-fitting suit. "You cannot stop what has already begun," it said, its voice a horrifying mixture of a young girl's and something ancient and inhuman. Before we could react, it was on us. Malcolm went flying, crashing into the side of the cabin with a sickening thud. Julie's chanting faltered as the thing that looked like a girl wrapped its hands around her throat. I acted on instinct, grabbing the iron crowbar Malcolm had dropped and swinging it with all my might. It connected with the creature's head, and for a moment I saw its true form, a writhing mass of darkness and teeth and eyes so alien it hurt to look at. The creature staggered back, letting go of Julie. She gasped for air, but to her credit she immediately resumed the chant, her voice hoarse but determined. What followed was a battle unlike anything I could have imagined. Malcolm rejoined the fray, and together we fought against a being that could change its shape at will, that could be solid one moment and intangible the next. All the while, Julie's voice rose and fell in that eldritch chant, the words seeming to take on a physical form in the air around us. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt something change. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. The creature let out a howl of rage and fear. "Now!" Julie screamed. "Thomas, the talisman!" I pulled out the final component of the ritual, a small carved stone that we had found hidden in the floorboards of the cabin. As I held it up, it began to glow with an inner light. The creature lunged for me, its form shifting and twisting in ways that made my eyes water. But before it could reach me, a blinding flash of light erupted from the talisman. The creature screamed, a sound of such utter anguish and loss that it brought tears to my eyes, and then silence. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the woods lifted like a veil being torn away. The sickly light faded, leaving only the warm glow of the morning sun. The whispers that had plagued us for so long finally, blessedly, fell silent. We stood there, panting and stunned, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then, from the direction of the camp, we heard cheering. As we made our way back, supporting each other on shaky legs, we saw the other counselors and the campers spilling out of the mess hall. Mr. Hadley was at the front, his grizzled face split in a grin of relief and pride. "You did it," he said simply, pulling us into a rough embrace. "You actually did it." The next few hours passed in a blur. The road to the camp was miraculously cleared, as if the fallen tree and washed-out bridge had never existed. Parents arrived to pick up their children, full of questions about the freak storm that had cut off communication with the camp. We counselors shared knowing looks, silently agreeing to keep the true events of that night to ourselves. Who would believe us anyway? As the last of the campers departed, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods with Malcolm and Julie. The forest that had seemed so menacing now looked ordinary, peaceful even. "So," Malcolm said, breaking the silence, "same time next year?" Julie punched him lightly on the arm, but she was smiling. "I think I've had enough camping to last a lifetime." As for me, I looked out at those woods, remembering everything we had been through, everything we had faced and overcome. "You know," I said slowly, "I think I might stick around. Someone needs to keep an eye on this place, make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Malcolm and Julie nodded in understanding. We had been through something extraordinary together, something that had changed us forever. We had seen the darkness that lurked at the edges of our world, and we had faced it down. As we turned to leave, I cast one last look at the woods. For a moment, just for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of white among the trees, a young girl smiling and at peace. Then she was gone, and there was only the wind rustling through the leaves. The summer of 1999 at Camp Iversky had begun as a simple job, a way to pass the time and make some money. It ended up being the defining moment of my life, the crucible in which I discovered my true strength and purpose. The darkness had been pushed back, but I knew it would always be there, waiting, and I would be ready. For I am Thomas Wilson, guardian of the Whispering Woods, protector against the things that lurk in the shadows. And this is my story. 25 years have passed since that fateful summer at Camp Iversky. I'm 75 now, my hair gone gray, and my face lined with the passage of time. But I've never forgotten the events of those few weeks, nor the responsibility I took on. I bought the camp after that summer, using every penny I had and going into debt. Over the years, I've rebuilt it, turning it into a thriving summer retreat. But more importantly, I've kept watch. Every 27 years, when the boundary grows thin, I'm ready. I've gathered a team of trusted individuals, people who have seen the truth of what lurks in the shadows. Together, we stand guard against the darkness. Malcolm and Julie have remained a part of my life, though they've moved on to other things. Malcolm became a professor of folklore and mythology, his experiences at Camp Iversky driving him to seek out the truth behind other legends. Julie went into journalism, using her skills to investigate and expose other supernatural occurrences around the world. They visit when they can, especially as the 27-year mark approaches. Mr. Hadley passed away a few years after that summer, but not before passing on everything he knew about the camp and its history. His knowledge has been invaluable in our ongoing efforts to keep the forces of darkness at bay. As for the girl in the white dress, I've seen her a few times over the years, always at a distance, always with that same peaceful smile. I like to think that by closing the breach, we not only saved our world but gave her some measure of peace as well. Now, as I sit on the porch of my cabin, looking out over the camp that has been my home and my duty for the past quarter century, I can feel it coming again. The air is growing heavy. The whispers at the edge of hearing are starting to return. The 27-year cycle is almost complete. But this time we're ready. We've learned, we've prepared, and we will not falter. For we are the guardians of Camp Iversky, the protectors of the Whispering Woods, and as long as we stand watch, the darkness shall not prevail. As the sun sets on another day, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, I smile to myself. Let them come. We'll be waiting. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from the sheriff. They had found something. Remains in a remote part of the forest far from the camp. DNA tests confirmed what I already feared. It was Jimmy and Taylor. Their families finally had some closure, but it didn't erase the pain. I attended the memorial services, standing in the back, feeling like an intruder in their grief. I wanted to say something, to offer some words of comfort, but what could I say that would make any of it better? In the end, all I could do was promise myself that I would never let something like that happen again. I joined a search and rescue team, dedicating my time to finding those who were lost, hoping to make a difference, to atone for the past. Pine Hollow never reopened. The campgrounds were left to nature, a haunting reminder of the summer that went horribly wrong. Sometimes I go back, standing at the edge of the lake, listening to the silence and remembering the laughter that once filled the air. I know now that the world can be a dark and unpredictable place, but I also know that we can't let fear control us. We have to keep moving forward, keep searching for the light even in the darkest of times. And so I continue my work, driven by the memory of Jimmy and Taylor, hoping that in some small way I can honor their lives by helping others find their way home. But the memories of that summer at Pine Hollow will always be with me. The eerie silence of the forest at night, the cold, empty eyes of Silas McCready, the gut-wrenching fear when Jimmy and Taylor disappeared. These are things I can never forget. They've become a part of me, shaping who I am and how I see the world. I often wonder about Silas. What drove him to such madness? Was he always evil, or did something in his past twist him into the monster we encountered? I visited him in prison a few times over the years, hoping to understand, to find some closure. But each time, I leave with more questions than answers. He sits there, staring at me with those same lifeless eyes, occasionally mumbling about the spirits of the forest and how they demanded sacrifice. The legend of the crazed miner that Quinn told us around the campfire that first week has taken on a new, sinister meaning for me. Sometimes I wonder if there was more truth to it than we realized. Could the evil that possessed Silas have been something older, something tied to the land itself? It's a chilling thought, one that I try to push away, but it creeps back in the dark of night. I've kept in touch with Quinn over the years. He never quite got over what happened either. He tried to move on, got married, had kids, but I could always see the shadow of Pine Hollow in his eyes when we talked. He confessed to me once, after a few too many drinks, that he blamed himself for telling that story, as if his words had somehow summoned the evil that befell us. The parents of Jimmy and Taylor have shown incredible strength throughout this ordeal. I've watched them channel their grief into action, setting up foundations to help find missing children and support families going through similar ordeals. Their resilience is both inspiring and heartbreaking. I often think about the lives Jimmy and Taylor might have led, the people they could have become. Those thoughts are always followed by a deep, aching sadness. My work with search and rescue has brought me face to face with the darker side of nature many times. I've seen how quickly the wilderness can turn from beautiful to deadly, how easily people can get lost in its vastness. But I've also seen incredible acts of heroism and survival. It's given me a perspective on life and death that I never had before. There are nights when the memories come flooding back, vivid and terrifying. I can smell the pine needles, feel the chill of the night air, hear the lapping of the lake against the shore. In my dreams, I'm back at Pine Hollow, searching endlessly for Jimmy and Taylor, always one step behind, never able to save them. I wake up in a cold sweat, the echoes of their voices fading in my ears. But there are good memories, too, bittersweet now with the knowledge of what was to come. I remember the sound of children's laughter echoing across the lake, the warmth of the campfire on cool summer nights, the sense of camaraderie among the counselors. Those moments of joy and innocence stand in stark contrast to the horror that followed, making it all the more tragic. As I've grown older, I've come to realize that the events at Pine Hollow were a turning point in my life. They shattered my youthful innocence and showed me the true face of evil. But they also taught me about resilience, about the importance of community in the face of tragedy, and about the strength of the human spirit. I often think about the other campers from that summer. How did the events at Pine Hollow affect them? Did they carry the same scars, the same haunting memories? I've reached out to a few over the years, and their stories are all different. Some blocked it out entirely, while others, like me, found it changed the course of their lives. As I sit here, an old man now, looking back on that summer, I'm struck by how it continues to shape my life. The terror of those weeks has faded somewhat, replaced by a deep, abiding sadness for the lives lost and the innocence shattered. But there's also a fierce determination that grew out of that experience. A determination to protect, to serve, to make sure that what happened at Pine Hollow never happens again. I know that I can't change the past. Jimmy and Taylor are gone, and no amount of wishing or regret will bring them back. But I can honor their memory by living my life with purpose, by helping others, by being the kind of person they might have become if given the chance. So I continue on, carrying the weight of Pine Hollow with me. It's a burden, yes, but also a reminder of why I do what I do. Every person I help find their way home, every life I touch through my work, is a small victory against the darkness that claimed Jimmy and Taylor. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods on a rescue mission, I feel a presence. Not something sinister like Silas, but something comforting. Maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe it's Jimmy and Taylor watching over me, guiding me. In those moments, I feel a sense of peace, a feeling that despite all the horror and tragedy, there's still good in the world. And that's what keeps me going, day after day, year after year. The story of Pine Hollow isn't just a tale of horror. It's a story of loss and grief, yes, but also of resilience and hope. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the strength to carry on, to help others, to make a difference. And as long as I'm able, that's exactly what I'll continue to do. It was August 1st, 2009, and living off the grid in Wyoming wasn't all sunshine and solitude. Sure, the lack of neighbors was a perk, but fresh produce deliveries were a 4-hour trek down a dirt road that turned into a mudslide whenever it rained. In Wyoming, rain wasn't frequent, but when it did come, it seemed to make up for lost time. My name is Kevin Ramirez, and at 27 years old, I had chosen a life far removed from the bustle of city living. That Thursday started like any other. I woke to the insistent chirping of a blue jay outside my window, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and sat on the porch overlooking a vast expanse of nothing. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the tall pines and the distant rumble of a freight train on the tracks several miles away. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that city folk paid good money for in weekend getaways. For me, it came free, along with the responsibility of fixing my own leaky pipes and shoveling myself out of snowdrifts. As I sipped my coffee, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. After graduating college with a degree in environmental science, I had worked for a few years in various conservation projects. The more time I spent in nature, the more I felt drawn to a simpler way of life. When I inherited this cabin from my uncle, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to disconnect from the chaos of modern living and reconnect with the natural world. Of course, living off the grid came with its own set of challenges. I had to learn how to maintain a solar power system, purify my own water, and grow much of my own food. The internet was a luxury I only indulged in during my monthly trips into town for supplies. Cell phone reception was spotty at best, which meant I had to rely on an old-fashioned landline for emergencies. As the morning wore on, I tended to my small vegetable garden, harvesting some ripe tomatoes and checking on the progress of my squash plants. The work was satisfying, connecting me to the land in a way I had never experienced before. By midday, I had settled into my usual routine of reading and writing in my journal, documenting my observations of the local wildlife and any interesting weather patterns. The peace shattered around noon. A guttural screech echoed through the valley, long and mournful, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It sent shivers down my spine and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I grabbed my binoculars, the one concession to modern technology I allowed myself, and scanned the tree line. Nothing. The screech came again, closer this time, and a primal fear, a fear I hadn't felt since I was a kid camping with my dad and heard a mountain lion nearby, flooded my system. I spent the rest of the afternoon on edge, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig making me jump. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, I tried to convince myself that my imagination had gotten the better of me. But just as I was starting to relax, the screech came again. This time it was accompanied by a low growl, a sound that vibrated the very ground beneath my feet. Panic clawed at my throat. I grabbed my rifle, a trusty .30, .06 that I kept for protection against the occasional aggressive wildlife. With shaking hands, I loaded the weapon and stepped off my porch, following the sound towards the denser part of the forest behind my cabin. The trees grew thick here, sunlight barely penetrating the dense canopy. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of pine and something else, something metallic and feral. As I pushed deeper into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. There, on a rocky clearing bathed in the dying light of the sun, I saw it. The sight before me defied explanation, challenging everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The creature that stood before me was unlike anything I'd ever encountered in my years of studying wildlife. Towering at least 8 feet tall, it was a hulking mass of muscle and bone. Its body was covered in a thick mat of matted black fur, and its head resembled a bear's, except for the 2 sets of razor-sharp teeth that protruded from its gaping maw. 2 glowing red eyes like smoldering embers locked onto me. The creature let out another earth-shattering roar, the sound so loud it made my ears ring. Adrenaline surged through my veins, momentarily overriding the primal fear. I raised my rifle, aimed for the center of its massive chest, and fired. The shot echoed through the silent woods, but the creature didn't even flinch. It took a lumbering step towards me, the ground trembling with each footfall. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of undiscovered species? A mutant bear affected by environmental toxins? Or was I losing my mind, hallucinating from the isolation of my solitary lifestyle? There was no time for rational thought. My body reacted on autopilot. I ejected the spent cartridge, slammed another bullet into the chamber, and fired again, this time aiming for the head. This time the creature reacted. It let out a blood-curdling shriek, a sound that promised unimaginable pain, and clutched at its head with a massive paw. I could see a dark stain spreading on its fur, but it didn't slow down. It roared again, a sound laced with fury, and charged. Time seemed to slow down, the world around me sharpening into a terrifying focus. I could see every detail of the monster bearing down on me, the saliva dripping from its jaws, the muscles rippling under its matted fur, the murderous gleam in its glowing eyes. I stumbled backward, tripped over a hidden root, and fell sprawling onto the damp earth. The rifle clattered out of my reach. The creature loomed over me, its fetid breath washing over my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. In that moment, my life didn't flash before my eyes. Instead, I was filled with regret. Regret for the family I had left behind, for the experiences I would never have, for the foolishness that had led me to confront this impossible beast alone. A deafening crack echoed through the clearing. The beast roared in pain, a sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I dared to open my eyes a sliver. The creature was no longer focused on me. It was thrashing on the ground, a dark stain spreading rapidly across its chest. Another shot rang out, followed by a curse. A figure emerged from the trees behind the creature. It was Sarah, my nearest neighbor, a gruff woman who lived a mile down the road. She was a crack shot, a skill honed from years of hunting deer in the fall. She never struck me as the type to be comfortable around guns, but necessity had a way of changing people out here in the wilderness. The creature let out a final earth-shaking bellow before going still. Sarah approached cautiously, her rifle held tight. She circled the beast, her face grim. Finally, she lowered her weapon. "What the hell was that thing?" she asked, her voice rough with a mixture of fear and awe. I shook my head, unable to speak. She didn't need an answer. The sight before us spoke volumes. The creature was unlike anything either of us had ever seen. It was a monstrosity, a testament to some unknown horror lurking in the deep woods. Sarah knelt beside the carcass and examined the bullet wounds. There were 2 neat holes in its chest and a third larger one in its head. She whistled through her teeth. "Never seen anything like this before," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and disgust. "Looks like something out of a nightmare." We stood there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. My body ached, adrenaline slowly draining away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "We need to call the sheriff," Sarah said finally. I nodded, my throat still too tight to speak. The aftermath was a blur. Sheriff Brody arrived with a team of deputies. They examined the creature, taking pictures and measurements. They asked me questions over and over about what had happened. They were skeptical at first, of course. "You're sure it wasn't just a bear?" the sheriff asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "No, sir," I said, my voice hoarse. "It wasn't a mountain lion or a bear. I've seen plenty of those. This was something else." Sarah backed me up, her gruff demeanor lending credence to my story. The bullet holes in the creature were a stark reminder that whatever it was very real. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sheriff seemed to accept my story. He didn't know what the creature was, but he knew it was dangerous. "We'll keep an eye out," he promised, his expression grim. "And you two be careful. Don't go wandering around the woods alone for a while." The news of the creature spread like wildfire through the small town. Newspapers ran stories, complete with grainy photos of the carcass. There were theories, of course, a mutant bear, a wild dog, even a chupacabra, but no one knew for sure what it was. For weeks, fear hung heavy in the air. People were jumpy, reluctant to leave their homes after dark. Then, as quickly as it started, the fear subsided. No other sightings were reported. Life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an encounter. The experience left a mark on me, though. The memory of the creature, its grotesque form and blood-curdling screams, haunted me. I slept with a loaded rifle by my bed, and every rustle of leaves in the wind sent a shiver down my spine. One evening, a few months after the attack, Sarah dropped by. She brought a bottle of whiskey and a plate of her famous apple pie. We sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. "You ever think about that thing?" she asked, taking a swig of whiskey. "Every damn day," I admitted. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. "You know," Sarah said finally, "there's an old trapper who lives up north. Reclusive fella, doesn't see much of anyone. Heard rumors, though, about things he's seen in the woods, crazy things." A spark of curiosity flickered to life within me. Maybe, just maybe, this trapper knew something about the creature. "You think he'd talk?" I asked. Sarah shrugged. "Worth a shot. Can't hurt to ask." The next week, we made the trek north. It was a long drive through winding mountain roads and dense forests. Finally, we reached the trapper's cabin, a ramshackle structure nestled at the edge of a frozen lake. An old man with a weathered face and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 winters answered our knock. We explained what had happened, showed him the pictures from the newspaper. He listened intently, his face impassive. When we finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice raspy with age. "Wendigo," he said, the single word heavy with meaning. "Wendigo?" I echoed, the name unfamiliar. The trapper nodded. He told us stories, whispered around campfires for generations, of a creature driven mad by hunger, its body warped by a never-ending craving for flesh. A creature that dwelled in the deep woods, a solitary hunter of men. His words sent chills down my spine. Whether the creature we encountered was truly a Wendigo or not, it didn't matter. The encounter had changed me. It had shown me a glimpse of the darkness that lurked in the wild places, a darkness that most people never even knew existed. But it had also shown me the strength of human connection. Sarah, my gruff neighbor, had become my lifeline in those dark weeks after the attack. And the trapper, a solitary man living on the fringes of society, had offered a piece of knowledge, a whisper of understanding in the face of the unknown. As we drove away from the trapper's cabin, the sun sinking low in the sky, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The creature, the Wendigo, might still be out there, but I wasn't alone. There were others who knew, who had seen glimpses of the darkness, and together we would keep watch, a silent vigil against the shadows that danced at the edge of the world. In the years that followed, I never saw the creature again. But sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howls through the pines, I think I can hear its mournful cry echoing across the valley. And in those moments, I'm reminded of the thin line that separates the world we know from the one we don't, the realm of myth and nightmare that exists just beyond the reach of our understanding. I still live in my cabin, still embrace the solitude of the wilderness, but I'm not the same man who moved here all those years ago. I'm warier now, more alert to the hidden dangers that lurk in the shadows. I've learned to respect the wild in a way I never did before, to acknowledge that there are forces out there beyond our comprehension. Sarah and I have grown closer over the years, bonded by our shared experience. We look out for each other, checking in regularly and sharing any unusual sightings or sounds. The trapper passed away a few winters back, but his stories live on, whispered around campfires and passed down to a new generation of wilderness dwellers. Sometimes, when city folk come up here for their weekend getaways, I see them looking at the woods with wonder and excitement. They see beauty and tranquility, and they're not wrong, but they don't see what I see. They don't know about the other side of nature, the dark primordial force that can rear its head when you least expect it. I don't try to scare them with my story. Most wouldn't believe it anyway. Instead, I watch and I listen and I stay prepared. Because out here, in the vast wilderness of Wyoming, you never know what might be watching you from just beyond the tree line. The encounter with the Wendigo, or whatever it was, changed my life forever. It opened my eyes to a world beyond the one I thought I knew, a world where myth and reality blur together in the deep, dark woods. And while the memory of that night still sends a chill down my spine, I wouldn't change a thing. Because in facing the unknown, in confronting the impossible, I found a strength I never knew I had. I found a community, however small, of people who understand. And I found a new appreciation for the wild, untamed beauty of the world around me, both its light and its shadows. So I'll keep living here, in my little cabin in the woods. I'll keep watching the tree line, listening for that unearthly screech. And if it ever comes again, I'll be ready. Because now I know the truth. The greatest horrors aren't always the ones we can see. Sometimes they're the ones that lurk just out of sight, waiting for the moment when we let our guard down. But until then, I'll continue to embrace the solitude, the peace, and yes, even the fear that comes with living on the edge of the wilderness. Because out here, on the border between the known and the unknown, is where I truly feel alive.